Friends, if you want to watch the super hit movie Unfaithful, 2002, in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe. In today's video, we will be talking about the film Unfaithful, released in 2002, directed by Diane Lane. This movie is one of the most discussed romantic thrillers of its time, and even after 2 decades, it continues to spark conversations about love, betrayal, and morality. In this video, I will cover everything about the movie, including what it is about, where you can watch it, interesting facts from behind the scenes, technical aspects, music, production details, box office performance, and a short story overview along with a review of the plot and performances. Unfaithful, 2002, is an American erotic thriller film directed by Diane Lane, who is well known for his previous works such as Fatal Attraction and Indecent Proposal. The film is based on the 1969 French movie La Femme Infidèle, directed by Claude Chabrol. It stars Richard Gere, Diane Lane, and Olivier Martinez in leading roles. The movie tells a story that explores the darker side of relationships and human desires. It follows a seemingly perfect suburban couple whose marriage takes a shocking turn after an affair begins and leads to unexpected consequences. The story revolves around Connie Sumner, played by Diane Lane, who lives with her husband Edward, played by Richard Gere, and their young son in New York. They appear to have the ideal marriage and a comfortable suburban life. However, everything changes when Connie has a chance encounter with a handsome young Frenchman named Paul Martel, played by Olivier Martinez, in the city. What begins as a small accident on a windy day turns into a passionate affair that spirals out of control. As Connie becomes increasingly obsessed with Paul, Edward starts to notice changes in her behavior. Suspicion grows, leading him to hire a private investigator. When Edward discovers the truth, the story takes a dark and emotional turn, exploring guilt, rage, and the devastating effects of betrayal. From a technical perspective, Unfaithful stands out for its strong direction and emotional tone. Diane Lane uses his signature visual style, soft lighting, slow camera movements, and detailed character emotions, to create a sense of tension and intimacy. The cinematography by Peter Bijou beautifully captures both the warmth of family life and the cold isolation that comes with guilt. The editing by N.V. Coates is seamless, keeping the audience engaged and balancing the emotional moments with the thriller aspects. The music, composed by Jan Epi Keshmek, adds depth to the storytelling, perfectly matching the emotional rhythm of the film. The production process was carefully designed to match Lane's vision. Pre-production involved extensive character studies and rehearsals to ensure authentic chemistry between the lead actors. Filming took place mostly in New York City and Westchester County, showcasing both the urban charm and the suburban comfort that the characters live in. Post-production was focused on fine-tuning the pacing to ensure that every scene contributed to the emotional journey. In terms of budget and box office performance, Unfaithful was made with a production budget of around $50 million. Upon release, the movie performed successfully at the box office, grossing over $119 million worldwide. It was considered a commercial success and a critical talking point because of its bold subject matter and strong performances. Diane Lane received high praise for her portrayal of Connie, earning nominations for an Academy Award and a Golden Globe for Best Actress. Critics and audiences appreciated how she captured the inner conflict of guilt, desire, and emotional breakdown. Richard Gere's performance as Edward was also noted for its quiet intensity. He portrayed the role of a husband who loves deeply but is pushed beyond his emotional limits. Olivier Martinez as Paul brought charm and mystery to the film, perfectly embodying the temptation that draws Connie into her affair. The chemistry between Lane and Martinez was one of the most discussed aspects of the movie. Behind the scenes, Diane Lane focused heavily on realism. He wanted every emotional moment to feel genuine rather than exaggerated. Many of the film's most powerful scenes were improvised or captured in long takes to keep the emotions raw. The intimate scenes were carefully choreographed to reflect passion without losing emotional depth. Unfaithful is more than just a story about adultery. It is a psychological study of how a single choice can unravel an entire life. It questions whether passion can justify betrayal and whether forgiveness is truly possible after trust has been broken. The film leaves viewers reflecting on human weakness and moral responsibility. Overall, Unfaithful remains one of the most memorable romantic thrillers of the early 2000s. It combines emotional storytelling with suspense and realism. The strong direction, excellent performances, and thought-provoking themes make it a must-watch for anyone interested in dramatic and emotional cinema. If you haven't seen it yet, this is a film worth watching for its storytelling depth and remarkable performances that continue to stand the test of time. Unfaithful is a 2002 American erotic thriller directed by Diane Lane and written by Alvin Sargent and William Broyles Jr. It stars Diane Lane, Richard Gere, and Olivier Martinez in a gripping story about passion, betrayal, and the moral consequences of desire. The film explores how a single impulsive decision can destroy a seemingly perfect marriage and change lives forever. The story begins with Connie Sumner, played by Diane Lane, a loving wife and mother who lives a comfortable life with her husband Edward, played by Richard Gere, and their young son Charlie, played by Eric Persullivan. They live in a beautiful house in the suburbs of New York, and from the outside, everything looks ideal. Edward runs a successful business, and Connie spends her days managing the household and volunteering. However, beneath this calm surface, Connie feels a growing sense of monotony and restlessness. Her predictable suburban routine begins to feel suffocating, and that's when temptation crosses her path. One windy afternoon, while shopping in Soho, Connie accidentally collides with a young, handsome Frenchman named Paul Martel, played by Olivier Martinez. He helps her after she injures her knee and invites her up to his apartment to clean the wound. Paul lives in a small but artistic loft filled with books and music, which fascinates Connie. Though she leaves quickly, she cannot stop thinking about him. The encounter awakens a dormant excitement inside her that she has not felt in years. Soon, she returns to see Paul again under the pretense of buying books, and their meetings become increasingly intimate until they begin a passionate affair. Their relationship becomes intense and risky. Connie finds herself lying to her husband and skipping daily routines just to spend time with Paul. What begins as excitement turns into obsession. The film portrays her emotional conflict vividly, her guilt as a wife and mother and her irresistible attraction to Paul. Meanwhile, Edward begins to notice subtle changes in Connie's behavior. She seems distracted and distant, and their marriage begins to crack under the pressure of secrets. Suspicious, Edward hires a private investigator named Frank Wilson, played by Dominic Chianese, to follow Connie. The investigator collects photographs and evidence of Connie meeting Paul and eventually delivers them to Edward. Edward's discovery of the affair devastates him. In one of the most powerful scenes, he looks through the photographs showing Connie's moments of affection with Paul and struggles to process the betrayal. Despite his calm exterior, the emotional turmoil within him grows. Soon after, Edward decides to confront Paul. He visits Paul's apartment under the guise of a business conversation, but the tension is evident. During their uneasy conversation, Edward notices a snow globe that he once gave Connie sitting on Paul's shelf. The realization that his wife shared something so personal with another man ignites uncontrollable rage. In a moment of fury, Edward strikes Paul with the snow globe, killing him instantly. Panicked, Edward tries to cover up the crime. He wraps Paul's body in a rug, places it in his car, and drives to a landfill to dispose of it. The murder scene is not stylized but handled with chilling realism, emphasizing the emotional collapse rather than the act itself. Afterward, Edward returns home, attempting to resume normal life as if nothing happened. The police eventually discover Paul's abandoned car and begin investigating his disappearance. Detective Dean, played by Jelko Ivanek, visits the Sumners several times, but neither Connie nor Edward confesses anything. Connie later finds the photographs and evidence of her affair hidden in Edward's drawer. She realizes he knows everything, and though they never discuss it directly, the truth lies unspoken between them. In one emotional sequence, Connie remembers her affair and breaks down in tears, overwhelmed by guilt. Edward, too, is consumed by remorse, not only for his wife's betrayal but also for his own crime. Their once perfect marriage becomes a silent battleground filled with love, shame, and fear. The film concludes with Connie and Edward sitting in their car outside a police station, contemplating whether to confess. The camera lingers on their faces as they silently exchange glances, leaving the ending ambiguous. The question remains whether they will choose honesty and accept the consequences or continue living with their shared secret. Diane Lane delivers a powerful and emotional performance as Connie, portraying her vulnerability and internal struggle with authenticity. Her performance earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress and widespread critical acclaim. Richard Gere gives one of his most controlled and haunting performances as a man torn between love, rage, and guilt. Olivier Martinez brings charisma and danger to the role of Paul, perfectly embodying temptation and mystery. The cinematography by Peter Bijou captures both the warm tones of domestic life and the cold, isolating atmosphere of guilt. Jan Kaczmarek's musical score adds emotional depth, while Adrian Lyne's direction brings a blend of sensuality and tension that keeps viewers deeply engaged. Unfaithful is not just a story of infidelity, it is a story about human weakness, moral choices, and the devastating cost of secrets. It examines how passion and guilt can coexist and how love can survive even after trust is broken. The film's haunting ambiguity and powerful performances make it one of the most memorable psychological thrillers of the early 2000s. Unfaithful, 2002, begins with a tranquil image of suburban perfection, setting up a contrast that will slowly unravel. The opening scenes introduce Connie and Edward Sumner, a married couple living in a beautiful house in Westchester County, New York. Their lives appear stable and filled with love. Edward, played by Richard Gere, runs a successful security company, while Connie, played by Diane Lane, spends her time managing the household and caring for their young son Charlie, played by Eric Pursullivan. The early scenes establish a rhythm of normalcy, routine, and quiet satisfaction, but also subtle hints of emotional distance and restlessness in Connie's life. This setup creates the foundation for the film's central conflict. What happens when passion collides with comfort? The inciting incident occurs on a windy afternoon when Connie travels into the city for errands. A sudden gust of wind causes her to drop her belongings, and in the chaos, she literally bumps into Paul Martel, a young French book dealer played by Olivier Martinez. He helps her gather her things and invites her up to his apartment to clean a small injury she sustained during the accident. Their brief interaction feels innocent, but the film's camera lingers just long enough to show a spark of attraction. This moment plants the seed for the unfolding drama. Connie returns home to her husband and child, but her thoughts linger on Paul. She tries to shake the memory, yet curiosity and longing begin to grow. The rising action begins when Connie decides to visit Paul again, pretending it's to buy books. Their conversation quickly becomes flirtatious, and despite her attempts to maintain control, Connie is drawn into a dangerous attraction. The affair begins quietly with secret meetings in Paul's apartment, captured in long, intimate scenes that emphasize both passion and guilt. Lyne's direction makes each encounter feel emotionally charged rather than purely physical. Connie's double life deepens as she juggles her family obligations with her secret relationship. She lies to Edward, skips commitments, and even begins to show signs of nervous excitement around the house. The tension builds as the audience senses the inevitable collapse approaching. A major turning point comes when Edward begins to suspect something is wrong. He notices Connie's odd behavior, the missed calls, and the half-truths. In a moment of unease, he hires a private investigator named Frank Wilson, played by Dominic Chianese, to follow her. The investigator's photographs confirm Edward's worst fears. He watches evidence of Connie's betrayal, images of her laughing, embracing, and leaving Paul's apartment. This discovery becomes the emotional midpoint of the story, marking a shift from suspense to confrontation. Edward's reaction is not immediate violence but quiet devastation. The film lingers on his face as he processes what he has seen, creating empathy even for a man deeply wronged. The second half of the film escalates toward tragedy. Edward decides to confront Paul, leading to one of the movie's most powerful and shocking scenes. When Edward visits Paul's apartment, the conversation is polite but tense. The snow globe, a gift Edward once gave Connie, sits on Paul's table, symbolizing her divided affection. In a sudden and uncontrollable moment of rage, Edward strikes Paul with the snow globe, killing him instantly. This marks the film's most dramatic turning point and transforms Edward from victim to criminal. Diane Lane directs the scene with restraint, emphasizing the horror of accidental violence rather than sensationalism. The narrative then shifts into a tense aftermath. Edward attempts to cover up the crime, wrapping Paul's body in a rug, placing it in his car, and dumping it at a landfill. The film maintains a slow pace during these sequences, reflecting Edward's panic and disbelief. Meanwhile, Connie continues her daily life, unaware of what has happened. When Paul's body is discovered, the police begin investigating, and Detective Dean, played by Jelko Ivanek, questions both Edward and Connie. The suspense builds as their fragile calm begins to crack under the pressure of guilt and fear. The emotional peak of the film comes when Connie discovers the evidence of her affair in Edward's drawer, the same photos she thought were hidden forever. She realizes he knows everything and silently understands what he may have done. The following scenes show both of them trying to hold their family together while wrestling with unbearable guilt. Their love remains, but it is now buried under secrets and lies. The finale is both haunting and ambiguous. Edward and Connie drive to a police station late at night, parking outside. They sit in silence, their faces filled with exhaustion and regret. Connie looks at Edward, silently asking whether they should confess or continue living the lie. The film ends before revealing their decision, leaving the moral resolution to the audience's imagination. Unfaithful's narrative unfolds linearly, but Diane Lane manipulates emotional time through flashbacks, memory fragments, and lingering shots that make viewers feel the weight of each decision. Every major plot turn is tied to an emotional pivot: Connie's loneliness, Edward's heartbreak, Paul's arrogance, and the final collapse of their world. The film's structure is tight, with each act flowing naturally into the next, creating a powerful psychological portrait of ordinary people caught in extraordinary moral conflict. It leaves viewers questioning not just what they would do, but how far love and guilt can coexist before destroying everything they touch. Unfaithful, 2002, thrives not just on its plot but on the emotional and psychological complexity of its characters. Each of the three central figures, Connie Sumner, Edward Sumner, and Paul Martel, serves as a reflection of human weakness, longing, and consequence. Their interactions shape the story's moral landscape, and their subtle transformations reveal the true cost of desire and betrayal. Director Diane Lane uses performance, gesture, and silence as storytelling tools, allowing viewers to see internal struggles rather than hear them explained. Through this, the film becomes less about infidelity itself and more about the emotional evolution of those entangled in it. Connie Sumner, played by Diane Lane, begins as a picture of domestic stability. She is a wife and mother who appears content with her life in the suburbs. Her world is predictable: school runs, grocery trips, and afternoons volunteering. Yet beneath this calm surface lies a quiet dissatisfaction. The smallest signs reveal her yearning for excitement: the way she lingers when the wind blows through her hair, her fascination with city life, and her subtle disconnection during family dinners. These early cues make her encounter with Paul Martel believable. When she meets him by chance in Soho, her polite curiosity masks a deeper need to feel alive again. What she wants, initially, is not to destroy her family but to rediscover a version of herself that feels passionate and free. As the affair develops, Connie's actions grow more reckless, but her internal conflict deepens. Her gestures, such as touching her lips after leaving Paul's apartment or pausing in front of a mirror, show a woman caught between guilt and exhilaration. Diane Lane's performance captures every flicker of emotion: the thrill of new love, the shame of lying, and the heartbreak of knowing her world could collapse. One crucial moment of change occurs when she spots Edward's suspicious gaze during dinner. The brief eye contact tells us she realizes the line between fantasy and reality has disappeared. By the end, Connie transforms from a woman seeking freedom to one imprisoned by her own choices. Her silence in the final scene reveals how profoundly she has changed: no longer naive, no longer innocent, but fully aware of the damage caused by her desires. Edward Sumner, portrayed by Richard Gere, undergoes a different but equally powerful transformation. When we first meet Edward, he is steady, responsible, and emotionally reserved. He represents the comfort and reliability of domestic life. His love for Connie is genuine, but his emotional expression is muted, suggesting a man who values order over passion. When suspicion enters his world, Edward's composure begins to crack. Richard Gere plays him with a subtle restraint that makes his later breakdown even more devastating. Edward's turning point arrives when he discovers the truth through the private investigator's photos. His quiet devastation, sitting alone in his car staring at the evidence, speaks louder than any outburst. The man who built his life on stability is suddenly adrift in chaos. Edward's greatest moment of transformation comes during his confrontation with Paul. The scene in Paul's apartment is a masterclass in suppressed emotion. Edward enters seeking understanding but finds humiliation instead. The sight of the snow globe, a symbol of his marriage, in Paul's home pushes him past the edge. His impulsive act of violence is not premeditated. It is the eruption of years of repressed emotion. After killing Paul, Edward's behavior becomes increasingly complex. He shifts from rage to guilt, from denial to remorse. By the film's conclusion, he is a man haunted not just by his wife's betrayal but by his own moral collapse. His silence mirrors Connie's in the final scene, suggesting that both are now bound by the same secret and the same shared guilt. Paul Martel, played by Olivier Martinez, functions as both character and catalyst. When he first appears, he represents freedom, danger, and seduction. His life in the city contrasts sharply with the Sumners' suburban existence. Paul's charm is effortless, and his appeal lies in his confidence and mystery. He seems to live without rules, which fascinates Connie. However, as their relationship progresses, Paul's character becomes less romantic and more possessive. He calls her constantly, demands her time, and disregards the consequences of their affair. His desire for control reveals his own insecurity. Paul's presence forces both Connie and Edward to confront parts of themselves they had ignored, Connie's suppressed longing and Edward's buried rage. Paul's death is not only a narrative shock but also symbolic. It marks the death of illusion and fantasy, forcing the surviving characters to face reality. The side characters serve as mirrors rather than distractions. Charlie, their son, embodies innocence and stability. Every time Connie interacts with him, her guilt intensifies. The private investigator, Frank Wilson, is not just a plot device but a representation of truth. He exposes what the characters wish to hide. Even Detective Dean's quiet questions add moral pressure, making the Sumners' deception harder to sustain. By the end of Unfaithful, all characters experience transformation, though not redemption. Connie learns that passion without responsibility leads to destruction. Edward discovers that love can coexist with rage and guilt. Paul, though dead, leaves a lasting imprint as the embodiment of temptation. The film's final image of Connie and Edward in silence encapsulates their shared evolution. They began as a couple defined by comfort and end as two people forever changed by secrets. Their relationship, stripped of illusion, now rests on uneasy truth. Diane Lane's focus on gesture, silence, and expression ensures that every change feels earned, making Unfaithful a masterclass in character-driven storytelling where emotional evolution, not action, defines the film's true power. Unfaithful, 2002, stands out as much for its performances as for its story. The acting carries the emotional and moral weight of the film, turning what could have been a conventional tale of infidelity into a deeply human exploration of guilt, passion, and consequence. The film succeeds largely because of its three leads, Diane Lane, Richard Gere, and Olivier Martinez, each delivering performances that feel authentic and layered. Director Diane Lane relies on silence, physical gestures, and subtle expressions rather than dialogue to convey the inner turmoil of his characters, and his cast responds with a level of control and honesty rarely seen in mainstream thrillers. Diane Lane delivers what is arguably the defining performance of her career as Connie Sumner. From the first scene, Lane establishes Connie as a woman living an enviable life but quietly suffocating in predictability. What makes her portrayal remarkable is its restraint. She never overplays Connie's dissatisfaction or her attraction to Paul. Instead, she lets small details communicate her emotional shifts. Her eyes, her pauses, even the way she exhales after a kiss, all convey the confusion and excitement of someone awakening to emotions she had forgotten existed. In early scenes, she captures the innocence of curiosity, glancing at Paul's apartment with a half-smile that suggests temptation before she even realizes it. As the affair progresses, Lane transforms this curiosity into obsession. Her voice softens when she speaks to Paul but becomes clipped and distracted around Edward, revealing the dual life she is leading. One of the most memorable scenes that shows Lane's range occurs when Connie rides the train home after meeting Paul. The camera stays close on her face as she cycles through a storm of emotions: pleasure, guilt, disbelief, and joy. Without a single word, she conveys an entire internal narrative. It's a masterclass in screen acting, proving how much can be communicated through stillness and expression. Later, when Edward confronts her indirectly, Lane's physicality changes again. She avoids his gaze, fidgets, and lowers her tone, illustrating the weight of her secret. Even in silence, she is painfully expressive. Diane Lane earned an Academy Award nomination for this role, and it's easy to see why. Her performance captures the complexity of human weakness without judgment, making Connie both sympathetic and flawed. Richard Gere's portrayal of Edward Sumner is equally powerful but in a different register. Gere plays Edward with quiet dignity and emotional control, embodying the archetype of a man who believes his world is safe until it shatters. His performance relies on subtle tension rather than explosive outbursts. Gere's best moments come from his restraint, the way he studies Connie from across the room, the way his voice trembles slightly when he suspects something, or how he tries to smile even as his heart breaks. His scenes with the private investigator are understated but full of emotional gravity. When he finally sees photographic proof of Connie's affair, Gere's reaction is devastating, not because he shouts or cries but because he doesn't. The numb stillness on his face speaks of deep pain and disbelief. The film's most intense moment, the confrontation with Paul, showcases Gere's ability to convey moral collapse without theatrics. In that scene, his calm exterior breaks only for a second before he strikes Paul. The act feels spontaneous and horrifying, not because of brutality but because of the emotional truth behind it. Gere makes Edward's guilt afterward almost unbearable to watch. His posture slumps, his movements slow, and his eyes carry the weight of irreparable regret. By the film's end, Gere's performance transforms Edward from a symbol of stability into a portrait of human frailty. Olivier Martinez as Paul Martel brings an essential energy to the story. His performance balances charm with danger, making him both alluring and unsettling. Martinez's French accent, relaxed posture, and confident gaze make Paul instantly magnetic. He doesn't chase Connie aggressively. Instead, his calm assurance draws her in. This subtle performance choice makes their chemistry believable. Martinez also understands how to play silence. His glances and gestures are seductive but not exaggerated. However, as the affair progresses, his character becomes slightly possessive, and Martinez captures this shift through tone and movement. His once soft-spoken manner turns demanding, and his body language grows tense. His final scenes with Edward reveal a man unaware of the danger he has provoked, giving his character a tragic vulnerability. The chemistry between Diane Lane and Olivier Martinez is one of the film's strongest elements. Their first intimate scenes are handled with authenticity. Both actors bring emotional weight to the physical connection, making the affair feel less like lust and more like a dangerous need for validation. Lane's nervousness and Martinez's quiet confidence create a push-and-pull dynamic that feels entirely believable. Among the supporting cast, Eric Pursullivan as Charlie Sumner delivers a small but effective performance as the couple's son. His innocence heightens the emotional tension, reminding viewers of what Connie and Edward risk losing. Dominic Chianese as the private investigator Frank Wilson offers a subdued yet compelling performance. His scenes are brief but crucial, providing the film's moral lens, an outsider who uncovers the truth but remains detached from the emotional wreckage. Jelko Ivanek as Detective Dean adds a grounded realism to the later scenes, his calm questioning acting as a mirror to Edward's internal panic. Adrian Lyne's direction extracts the best from his actors by encouraging naturalism and emotional authenticity. He allows pauses, lingering looks, and silence to replace dialogue, giving performers space to breathe and react truthfully. The result is that every major emotional moment feels earned. Even in scenes where dialogue could have carried the emotion, Lyne trusts his cast to express it through physicality and tone. Overall, Unfaithful succeeds because its performances elevate the material beyond melodrama. Diane Lane brings vulnerability and raw emotion, Richard Gere delivers controlled intensity, and Olivier Martinez embodies temptation and danger. Together, their chemistry and individual work transform a story of infidelity into a haunting study of love, guilt, and moral consequence. The acting grounds the film in realism, ensuring that its most shocking moments feel like the inevitable outcome of genuine human behavior rather than scripted tragedy. The direction of Unfaithful 2002 plays a critical role in transforming what could have been a conventional story of infidelity into a slow-burning psychological thriller about desire, guilt, and consequence. Directed by Adrian Lyne, who is known for his exploration of sensuality and moral conflict in films like Fatal Attraction and 9.5 Weeks, this movie carries his unmistakable signature style, elegant, erotic, and emotionally charged. Lyne approaches the subject matter with deliberate pacing, allowing tension to build not just through plot but through subtle glances, pauses, and atmospheric visual storytelling. His control over tone keeps the film grounded in realism while still drawing out an almost dreamlike quality in moments of intimacy and regret. From the very beginning, Lyne's direction shapes the film's identity. The opening scenes of suburban calm set against the chaos of New York City are staged with precision. The contrast establishes the dual worlds that define Connie's internal struggle, her orderly life as a wife and mother and the chaotic, unpredictable world of passion she encounters with Paul. Lyne uses natural light, muted color palettes, and quiet soundscapes to draw viewers into the domestic sphere before disrupting it with sensual imagery once Connie steps into her affair. His use of visual storytelling ensures that even when little dialogue is spoken, the audience understands everything about Connie's emotional state. Lyne's attention to performance is one of his most valuable assets as a director. He draws deeply human portrayals from his cast, particularly Diane Lane, whose subtle emotional shifts define the movie's core. Instead of exaggerating the affair, Lyne focuses on micro-expressions and gestures that reveal layers of conflict. He uses close-ups generously, often lingering on Lane's face as she processes guilt or desire. These choices emphasize internal turmoil over spoken words, giving the audience an almost intrusive look into her conscience. His direction of Richard Gere as Edward is equally nuanced. Lyne allows Gere's character to remain quiet and contemplative for much of the film, which makes his eventual emotional explosion even more shocking. The decision to let silence dominate Edward's reactions until his breaking point mirrors the calm exterior of their suburban life, cracking only when the truth becomes undeniable. The resulting scene, where Edward confronts Paul, is a masterclass in directorial buildup. The tension is unbearable, not because of music or camera tricks, but because of Lyne's deliberate restraint. Stylistically, Adrian Lyne employs a cinematic language that combines sensuality with dread. He frequently uses slow motion and reflective imagery, mirrors, windows, rain, to blur the line between reality and fantasy. The way he stages the affair scenes is especially telling. They are not filmed to glamorize infidelity but to expose the vulnerability and recklessness behind passion. The camera movements are fluid and intimate, making the audience feel like voyeurs. This creates both allure and discomfort, a balance that Lyne has perfected in his previous works. The pacing of Unfaithful is another testament to Lyne's directorial confidence. Many modern thrillers rush through emotional beats, but here the film takes its time. Every scene feels deliberate, each edit designed to draw out tension. The transitions between Connie's domestic routine and her secret encounters are smooth yet emotionally jarring. Lyne never allows the audience to forget the consequences lurking beneath the surface, even in moments of apparent joy. His use of sound and silence reinforces this unease. There are long stretches with minimal dialogue where the sounds of footsteps, breathing, or city noise carry emotional weight. When music does appear, it complements rather than overwhelms. The film's score by Jan E. Keshmark works in harmony with Line's direction, adding layers of melancholy and suspense without dictating what the viewer should feel. One of Line's boldest choices is his refusal to provide easy answers. His direction invites the audience to interpret the morality of each character rather than judging them outright. He presents infidelity not as a simple act of betrayal but as a complex human failing driven by loneliness, curiosity, and the search for meaning. Even in scenes where the characters commit unforgivable acts, Line keeps them deeply human. This is where his direction shines. He doesn't moralize, he observes. The climactic scenes are executed with restraint and raw emotion. Line avoids overdramatization and instead focuses on the silent aftermath of chaos. The scene where Edward and Connie sit in the car after everything has unfolded is perhaps one of the finest examples of his directorial maturity. The framing, the lack of dialogue, and the lingering uncertainty encapsulate the film's essence. Actions have consequences, but emotions rarely fit into neat moral categories. In conclusion, Adrian Lyne's direction in Unfaithful 2002 is the film's backbone. His control over tone, pacing, and visual storytelling elevates the movie from a standard melodrama to a deeply psychological exploration of human weakness. Through his lens, every frame feels purposeful, every silence speaks volumes, and every glance carries weight. His ability to balance eroticism with empathy and suspense with realism makes Unfaithful a timeless study in moral complexity and cinematic craftsmanship. The cinematography of Unfaithful 2002 is one of the most vital elements that transforms it from a simple drama into an emotionally layered psychological experience. Shot by Peter Bijou, an Academy Award-winning cinematographer known for his work in films like Mississippi Burning and In the Name of the Father, the visual design of Unfaithful perfectly complements Adrian Lyne's sensual yet restrained direction. Every frame of the film serves a purpose, reflecting not only what the characters are doing but what they are feeling. Through framing, lighting, color, and camera movement, Bijou creates a visual language that mirrors the emotional and moral conflict at the heart of the story. From the very first shot, the cinematography establishes duality, a recurring theme throughout the film. The movie opens with images of suburban perfection, wide, open shots of a peaceful neighborhood, a family home bathed in soft natural light, and the comforting chaos of an ordinary morning. These images give the illusion of stability and warmth, suggesting an idyllic life. But as the story progresses and Connie becomes entangled in her affair with Paul, the camera gradually shifts toward darker, more intimate compositions. The wide shots that once conveyed comfort begin to feel isolating, while the close-ups grow tighter and more suffocating. This shift subtly communicates how Connie's world, once vast and orderly, begins to close in on her as guilt and passion consume her. Lighting plays an equally powerful role in shaping the film's emotional texture. The cinematography uses a naturalistic approach that enhances realism while strategically manipulating light to reflect psychological states. The scenes inside Connie and Edward's home are typically shot with warm, golden tones that evoke security and domestic harmony. In contrast, the scenes with Paul are drenched in cooler, muted light, often filtered through windows or blinds, suggesting secrecy and emotional detachment. One of the most notable visual motifs is the interplay between light and shadow. Shadows often dominate the screen during Connie's encounters with Paul, visually representing the moral darkness she's entering. There are moments when light barely touches her face, giving the impression that she's slowly being swallowed by the choices she makes. In contrast, the suburban sequences are filled with soft daylight that almost feels sterile, highlighting how the comfort of normalcy can also be stifling. Peter Bijou's use of color adds another layer of meaning. The film's palette evolves as the narrative progresses. Early scenes are filled with beige, cream, and warm brown tones, colors associated with safety and familiarity. As the affair begins, the palette shifts to more metallic grays, blues, and dim golds, evoking the thrill and danger of forbidden desire. By the time the film reaches its emotional climax, these colors begin to blend, symbolizing the collapse of moral boundaries and the blurring of right and wrong. Camera movement in Unfaithful is deliberate and elegant, never calling attention to itself but always enhancing the emotional rhythm. In domestic scenes, the camera remains relatively static or moves with gentle fluidity, reflecting the calm monotony of everyday life. But once Connie meets Paul, the movements become more dynamic and unpredictable. Handheld shots and slow tracking movements create intimacy and tension, making the viewer feel both drawn into and complicit in her secret. The camera often lingers a little too long, especially during moments of emotional or physical closeness, forcing the audience to confront the discomfort of desire and guilt. One of the most remarkable sequences from a cinematographic standpoint is Connie's subway ride after her first encounter with Paul. The camera captures her face in close-up as she processes the mix of excitement, shame, and fear coursing through her. The reflections in the subway window double her image, suggesting her internal conflict and dual identity as both wife and lover. The editing complements this with rhythmic cuts between her memories and the present moment, but it's the lighting and framing that make the scene unforgettable. The harsh fluorescent lights contrast sharply with the soft warmth of her memory, making the entire sequence feel like a visual confession. Another striking visual choice is the way the camera treats space. In Edward's office and the couple's home, compositions often emphasize symmetry and order, mirroring his structured, rational world. Meanwhile, Paul's loft is chaotic, filled with stacks of books, uneven lighting, and layers of texture. The camera explores this space in a fluid, curious way, mirroring Connie's emotional curiosity. These contrasts are not merely aesthetic. They embody the thematic tension between order and chaos, safety and danger, truth and deceit. Depth of field also plays a subtle but significant role. Bijou often keeps backgrounds softly out of focus, isolating the characters visually to emphasize their emotional isolation. This technique is particularly effective in scenes where Connie is surrounded by her family but lost in thought. The shallow focus traps her within her own perspective, allowing viewers to experience her internal detachment without needing explicit dialogue. Even in the film's climactic moments, the cinematography resists melodrama. When Edward confronts Paul, the lighting is stark and unromantic, with cool blue tones and practical light sources. The camera remains intimate but steady, reflecting Edward's bottled-up rage. The visual restraint of this scene makes the eventual act of violence more shocking because it feels disturbingly real rather than cinematic. In its final scenes, the cinematography returns to calmness, but with an undercurrent of unease. The morning light that once represented peace now feels ambiguous, uncertain, and almost cold. This visual ambiguity mirrors the unresolved moral tension left hanging by the narrative. In conclusion, the cinematography of Unfaithful 2002 is not just decorative, it is essential to the storytelling. Peter Bijou's visual choices mirror every emotional beat, from the allure of passion to the suffocating weight of guilt. Through masterful use of light, color, framing, and movement, the camera becomes an active participant in the narrative, revealing the characters' inner lives in ways that words cannot. It is this visual sophistication that makes Unfaithful a lasting piece of cinematic art, as haunting in its imagery as it is in its themes. The editing and pacing of Unfaithful 2002 are central to how the film sustains its emotional intensity and psychological tension from beginning to end. Edited by Anne V. Coates, the legendary film editor best known for her work on Lawrence of Arabia, the editing in Unfaithful is precise, understated, and deeply attuned to the emotional undercurrents of the story. Rather than relying on flashy cuts or fast-paced transitions, the film adopts a deliberate rhythm that mirrors the slow unraveling of its characters' moral and emotional stability. Coates's approach to pacing is one of patience and subtle escalation, allowing the audience to feel every heartbeat of temptation, guilt, and dread as the narrative unfolds. The film's structure is straightforward and linear, yet its pacing plays a crucial role in shaping how viewers experience time and tension. The first act moves at a calm, almost languid pace, immersing the audience in the comfortable routine of suburban life. The transitions are smooth, often crossfading between domestic moments to emphasize the predictability of Connie and Edward's marriage. This slow rhythm is intentional. It establishes normalcy and routine before introducing the disruption of Paul. When Connie meets Paul in New York, the pacing subtly shifts. The cuts become slightly quicker, and the editing begins to mirror her internal restlessness. The transitions between her home life and her secret encounters grow more abrupt, symbolizing her emotional fragmentation. Coates uses cross-cutting effectively here, alternating between Connie's domestic responsibilities and her growing obsession with Paul. This editorial rhythm builds tension not through action, but through emotional contrast. The juxtaposition of calm family scenes and passionate secret meetings heightens the sense of danger and duplicity. One of the film's most memorable editorial achievements is its use of visual memory and nonlinear inserts. During Connie's subway ride after her first affair, the editing oscillates between her present and her recent past. These flashes are not presented as traditional flashbacks but as emotional echoes. Coates employs quick cuts and overlapping sound to mimic the way memory intrudes on the present. This sequence is both sensual and unsettling, with the rhythm accelerating to mirror Connie's racing heart and collapsing moral restraint. The technique not only propels momentum but also deepens psychological realism. The editing throughout Unfaithful demonstrates a strong trust in silence and restraint. Many modern thrillers depend on rapid-fire cuts and excessive score cues to maintain energy, but Coates and Line choose a slower, more organic rhythm. Long takes and extended silences dominate key moments, allowing emotion to build naturally. For example, when Edward begins to suspect Connie's affair, the pacing slows dramatically. The scenes stretch out with minimal dialogue and few cuts, forcing the audience to sit with his growing unease. The editorial rhythm becomes heavy and uncomfortable, mirroring Edward's internal struggle. This deliberate pacing turns ordinary actions, like a glance at a photograph or a phone call, into moments of intense emotional weight. In the film's middle act, as the affair intensifies, Coates subtly accelerates the editing rhythm. The cuts grow shorter, the transitions sharper, and the contrast between the two worlds more pronounced. However, she never loses control of tone. The editing is sensual and rhythmic, but never chaotic. Even during the most passionate scenes, the pace feels deliberate, reflecting the intoxicating yet dangerous allure of Connie's choices. The editing does not sensationalize the affair but instead builds an emotional crescendo that makes its eventual collapse inevitable. When the narrative reaches its turning point, the confrontation between Edward and Paul, the editing shifts again. The rhythm becomes tighter and more suspenseful. Coates cuts between Edward's quiet composure and Paul's oblivious arrogance, creating unbearable tension through pacing alone. The confrontation scene is a masterclass in restraint. The editing avoids unnecessary cuts, allowing the audience to feel the slow, suffocating buildup before the sudden, shocking act of violence. When it happens, there is no dramatic flourish, just a stark, almost accidental moment of impact that feels all the more disturbing because of the calm that precedes it. After the murder, the pacing changes once more. The editing slows down, creating a heavy, dreamlike rhythm that mirrors Edward's guilt and disorientation. Coates uses long dissolves and lingering shots to convey the passage of time and the emotional weight of what has occurred. The stillness after the chaos gives the audience space to process the enormity of the moment. Even as Edward cleans up the aftermath, the editing remains unhurried, emphasizing the psychological toll rather than the physical act. This sequence demonstrates how editing can create empathy through timing, by forcing us to experience the same slow, unbearable tension as the characters. Throughout Unfaithful, Coates also demonstrates mastery of pacing through her control of rhythm within scenes. Conversations unfold naturally, with pauses and silences preserved rather than trimmed. These unedited beats give the performances room to breathe and make the interactions feel authentic. The film's editing never manipulates emotion. It allows emotion to emerge from performance, composition, and timing. Even moments of suspense, such as when Edward pieces together the truth, are built on subtle timing rather than overt manipulation. The cross-cutting between Edward's discoveries and Connie's behavior at home builds dramatic irony, creating suspense through knowledge rather than action. The final act of the film is a study in emotional rhythm. As the couple sits in the car contemplating their future, Coates allows the moment to linger. The pacing slows to near stillness, mirroring the frozen uncertainty of their relationship. The editing here is minimal, with long takes that give the actors' performances full space to resonate. The stillness is haunting, and the lack of clear resolution reflects the film's moral ambiguity. In conclusion, the editing and pacing of Unfaithful 2002 are essential to its storytelling power. And Coates crafts a rhythm that mirrors the psychological journey of its characters, calm and structured at first, then increasingly fractured and tense. The film's smooth transitions, restrained cutting, and deliberate silences create a constant undercurrent of unease. The pacing never rushes to reveal answers but instead allows tension to accumulate organically, turning ordinary moments into profound emotional experiences. Through its thoughtful editing, Unfaithful becomes not just a story of infidelity, but a masterclass in cinematic rhythm and emotional timing. The soundtrack and score of Unfaithful 2002 play an integral role in shaping the emotional landscape of the film. Composed by Polish musician Jan Keszmuk, the score is haunting, intimate, and restrained, serving as an emotional undercurrent that guides viewers through the psychological complexity of the story. Rather than overpowering the narrative, the music works subtly, echoing the characters' desires, guilt, and despair. In a film where so much is expressed through silence, glances, and gestures, Kaczmarek's music functions as an invisible character, giving voice to what the protagonists cannot articulate. The most striking quality of the score is its elegance and minimalism. Kaczmarek avoids melodramatic swells and heavy orchestration, instead crafting a soundscape built on delicate piano lines, soft strings, and ambient textures. The main theme is both romantic and tragic, a simple piano motif that recurs throughout the film, evolving as Connie's emotional journey unfolds. At first, it feels tender and reflective, capturing the warmth and comfort of her domestic life. But as the affair begins and her moral compass falters, the same melody takes on darker, more sorrowful tones, reminding the audience that beauty and guilt are now intertwined. This transformation of the theme mirrors Connie's own evolution, making the music an emotional reflection of her inner state. Silence is just as important as music in Unfaithful. Director Diane Lane and Kaczmarek understand the power of absence, using quiet to create tension and realism. Many key moments unfold with little or no music at all. The first meeting between Connie and Paul, the slow realization of Edward's suspicion, or the long stretches of silence following the film's violent climax. These choices heighten the discomfort, forcing viewers to sit inside the character's emotions rather than being guided by musical cues. When the score does enter, it feels like a release, a wave of emotion breaking through the restraint. The balance between sound and silence gives the film its hypnotic rhythm, making the audience acutely aware of every breath, glance, and heartbeat. One of the most memorable uses of music comes during the subway sequence after Connie's first encounter with Paul. The scene intercuts her physical journey home with flashes of sensual memory, and Kaczmarek's score flows seamlessly between the two states of mind. The music starts with a soft, hesitant melody that mirrors her confusion and excitement, then builds into something more intoxicating as her memories intensify. The rhythm of the train, the sound of wheels on tracks, and the rising music combine to create a symphony of emotion that feels both ecstatic and tragic. Without this score, the scene would risk feeling disjointed or overly indulgent. With it, it becomes one of the film's most powerful and psychologically revealing moments. The soundtrack's minimal use of licensed music also contributes to the film's grounded tone. Lane and Kaczmarek resist the temptation to fill the film with popular songs or sentimental ballads. Instead, the diegetic sounds of the world, the hum of the city, the clinking of dishes, the rustle of fabric, become part of the sonic identity. When external music does appear, it often emerges from within the scene itself, such as background music playing in Paul's apartment or at a cafe. This approach preserves the film's sense of realism and intimacy. Every sound feels organic, existing naturally within the character's world rather than being imposed for dramatic effect. Kaczmarek's orchestration style is notable for its restraint. He builds emotion through repetition and subtle variation rather than through volume or grandeur. The string arrangements are often sparse, creating a sense of fragility and unease. In moments of tenderness, such as when Connie reflects on her family, the strings swell softly, evoking warmth and longing. But in scenes of guilt or confrontation, those same instruments shift to minor keys, transforming the atmosphere into something heavy and suffocating. This dynamic use of harmony underscores the duality of passion and regret that runs throughout the film. The score also contributes significantly to the tension in the third act. When Edward discovers the truth about Connie's affair, the music almost disappears, replaced by low, droning tones that mimic his internal numbness. As he drives to confront Paul, the score begins to re-emerge in fragments, unresolved chords, hesitant piano notes, the faint echo of the main theme. This fragmented musical structure mirrors Edward's fractured mental state and builds suspense without resorting to obvious thriller tropes. When the murder finally occurs, Lane and Kaczmarek make a bold decision. They withhold music entirely. The scene plays out in chilling silence, broken only by natural sounds. This choice makes the act feel raw, accidental, and horrifyingly real. Only afterward does the score return, quietly reintroducing the main motif but now stripped of its former warmth. The music becomes a lament, mourning not just Paul's death but the loss of innocence, trust, and moral clarity. In the film's closing scenes, Kaczmarek's music reaches its emotional peak. The piano returns with a sense of melancholy resolution as Connie and Edward sit together in the car, contemplating their shattered lives. The melody is slow, reflective, and unresolved, mirroring the ambiguity of their future. The music neither condemns nor forgives, it simply observes. It carries the emotional weight of the entire film, suggesting that while actions can't be undone, emotional connections endure even in ruin. What makes the score so effective is its restraint. Kaczmarek understands that the story's power lies in its subtleties. His compositions do not dictate what the audience should feel. Instead, they invite introspection. Each note serves to deepen the psychological realism of the characters rather than manipulate the audience. This understated approach aligns perfectly with Adrian Lyne's visual and narrative style, creating a cohesive emotional experience that lingers long after the film ends. In conclusion, the soundtrack and score of Unfaithful 2002 are essential to its storytelling success. Jan A. Kaczmarek's delicate, haunting compositions and the film's intelligent use of silence elevate every emotional beat, from passion to despair. The recurring musical motifs tie the narrative together, transforming music into a mirror of conscience and emotion. The score never overplays its hand. Instead, it enhances the film's subtlety, turning moments of stillness into moments of truth. Through its precise balance of sound and silence, Unfaithful achieves a timeless emotional resonance that makes its story not only seen but deeply felt. At its heart, Unfaithful 2002 is a film about moral fragility and the devastating consequences of human desire. While it may appear on the surface to be a story about adultery and crime, beneath the plot it explores universal themes of identity, guilt, temptation, and the fragile balance between passion and responsibility. Directed by Adrian Lyne, the movie doesn't simply condemn or justify infidelity, it dissects it, showing how one impulsive decision can unravel an entire life built on trust and stability. Through its characters and imagery, Unfaithful questions what it means to be faithful, not only to another person but to oneself. One of the central themes of the film is desire versus duty. Connie Sumner, played by Diane Lane, lives a life that appears perfect, an affluent home, a loving husband, and a son. Yet beneath this stability lies emotional stagnation. The film suggests that routine can dull the spirit, and in the search for excitement, people often lose sight of what truly matters. When Connie meets Paul, played by Olivier Martinez, she is drawn not just to him as a man but to what he represents. freedom, danger, and vitality. Her affair isn't driven by malice but by curiosity and longing for a forgotten part of herself. This tension between moral responsibility and emotional hunger lies at the center of the film's narrative. Through lighting, pacing, and silence, the story communicates that passion can be intoxicating but destructive when it collides with real-world obligations. Another key theme is guilt and its corrosive power. After the affair begins, the film shifts from erotic drama to psychological thriller, with guilt becoming the dominant emotion. Diane Lane's direction allows the audience to feel Connie's internal conflict. Her stolen moments of joy are shadowed by fear and remorse. The camera often lingers on her face as she oscillates between elation and despair, making guilt a constant, invisible presence in her life. This theme extends to Edward, her husband, played by Richard Gere. His discovery of the affair transforms guilt into something shared but differently expressed. While Connie suffers silently, Edward's guilt emerges through rage, helplessness, and ultimately violence. In this way, the film examines how betrayal reshapes both the betrayer and the betrayed, binding them together in mutual suffering. The theme of consequence also runs deeply throughout the narrative. Every action, no matter how private, ripples outward. The film resists moral absolutes. Connie's affair isn't portrayed as pure evil, nor is Edward's act of violence treated as righteous punishment. Instead, both are depicted as flawed human responses to emotional pain. Lane refuses to provide easy answers, leaving viewers to wrestle with their own judgments. The moral ambiguity is what gives the film its lasting power. The lack of a clear resolution at the end, where the couple sits silently in the car, facing an uncertain future, reinforces that actions cannot be undone, and forgiveness, if it comes, will not erase the damage. Another major theme is identity and self-discovery. Connie's journey is not simply about infidelity, it's about her search for meaning in a life that feels too controlled. The affair awakens a part of her she thought was gone, but it also exposes her emotional vulnerability. In seeking to rediscover herself, she loses the version of herself she values most: a loyal wife, a loving mother, a woman who can look in the mirror without shame. Through this lens, Unfaithful becomes a meditation on how people define themselves through relationships and how easily those definitions can collapse when tested by temptation. The film also touches on gender dynamics and power. Connie's actions challenge the traditional expectation of female loyalty and self-sacrifice, yet Lane's storytelling never vilifies her. Instead, it presents her as fully human, capable of passion and error. Edward, on the other hand, represents patriarchal stability, a man who believes he understands control until his world disintegrates. When he reacts violently, it's not just out of jealousy but from the collapse of his identity as a husband who could protect and maintain order. The murder becomes symbolic of the destruction of masculine certainty, exposing how fragile power becomes when love turns to betrayal. Fear is another undercurrent woven through the film's emotional fabric. It manifests as fear of exposure, fear of rejection, and fear of losing one's sense of self. For Connie, fear begins as a thrill. The danger of being discovered adds intensity to her affair, but later becomes a consuming dread. For Edward, fear arrives in the form of doubt, growing with each clue he uncovers. The film builds its tension not through external threats but through these internal anxieties that eat away at the characters' lives. Love, in Unfaithful, is portrayed not as a constant but as something mutable and easily distorted. The movie challenges the romantic ideal that love can conquer all. Instead, it shows love's darker sides: possessiveness, obsession, and pain. When Edward learns of Connie's betrayal, his actions are driven by a twisted form of love. His murder of Paul is both an act of rage and a desperate attempt to reclaim his lost sense of connection. The film ends with love neither triumphant nor destroyed. It remains, but transformed into something uneasy and uncertain. Symbolism throughout the film reinforces its themes. The recurring use of mirrors and reflections symbolizes duplicity and fractured identity. Rain and wind often accompany moments of emotional turmoil, representing cleansing and chaos. The contrasting settings, suburban brightness versus the dim, shadowy intimacy of Paul's loft, mirror the duality of safety and temptation. Even the film's use of silence becomes thematic, representing the emotional void that words cannot fill. Ultimately, Unfaithful is a study of moral complexity and emotional consequence. It explores how easily ordinary people can cross ethical boundaries and how difficult it is to live with the aftermath. The movie does not preach or punish, it observes. Its power lies in its honesty, its willingness to show that love, desire, and guilt often coexist in the same human heart. For American audiences, its themes resonate deeply because they touch on universal fears: the fear of losing control, of making one irreversible mistake, of watching something beautiful turn tragic. In the end, Unfaithful 2002 is not just about infidelity, it's about the fragile line between passion and destruction, and how the choices we make in moments of weakness can define us forever. Unfaithful 2002, directed by Diane Lane, is a film that relies far more on emotional realism and subtle visual storytelling than on digital effects. However, the film's visual approach is so carefully crafted that even its minimal use of visual effects deserves attention. While this movie does not employ large-scale CGI sequences or heavy compositing like contemporary blockbusters, it uses smaller, invisible effects and visual manipulations that enhance mood, tone, and realism without drawing attention to themselves. Understanding how these understated visual effects work is essential to appreciating how the film sustains its emotional intensity and grounded atmosphere. The early 2000s were a period when CGI was becoming more accessible but still not as sophisticated as it is today. Filmmakers like Diane Lane, who had a reputation for crafting sensual, psychologically complex dramas, favored practical techniques that complemented the authenticity of his stories. In Unfaithful, every digital enhancement serves the narrative rather than spectacle. The visual effects are invisible assistants, used to control weather, blend lighting continuity, and polish transitions between shots that were difficult to achieve practically. For instance, several scenes involving exterior sequences on windy, rainy days were subtly enhanced using digital compositing. These touches heighten the tension and mirror the emotional chaos of the characters. Rain, in particular, plays a symbolic role throughout the film. It often appears during moments of guilt or realization, such as when Connie rides home after visiting Paul or during the tense moments leading up to the film's climax. The rain was not always naturally captured on set. Instead, digital elements were added or intensified in post-production to make the scenes more visually expressive. These are not effects meant to dazzle but to deepen the film's emotional texture. Another form of visual enhancement used throughout Unfaithful is digital color grading. This was becoming an increasingly common tool in 2002, and Lane used it to fine-tune mood and contrast between different emotional spaces. The warm, golden tones of the suburban home represent safety, routine, and moral order, while the cooler, bluish or desaturated tones of Paul's loft signify danger, secrecy, and moral decay. These tonal adjustments were achieved not only through lighting on set but also through post-production grading, subtly manipulating the emotional undertones of each environment. This use of digital color correction qualifies as a kind of visual effect that profoundly shapes how the viewer experiences the narrative. Beyond weather and color, the film also employs invisible digital work for continuity and compositing. In some scenes involving reflections and mirrors, key motifs in the film, post-production adjustments were used to clean up camera reflections or adjust focus depth to keep the audience's attention on the actors. These digital corrections are often overlooked but play a crucial role in maintaining immersion. Rather than pulling the viewer out of the moment, they sustain the illusion of a seamless visual reality. Unlike films that rely heavily on motion capture or computer-generated environments, Unfaithful's use of visual effects is rooted in restraint. Its emphasis is on the authenticity of human emotion, and any technical intervention must serve that realism. For example, the scene where Edward discovers Paul's address and drives through the city in a silent storm uses subtle digital enhancements to exaggerate condensation and the blur of headlights. These details visually express Edward's internal storm of emotions: confusion, fury, and heartbreak. The merging of practical cinematography and digital enhancement turns what could have been an ordinary driving sequence into a moment of heightened psychological tension. While Unfaithful does not contain large-scale CGI, its most powerful visual manipulation comes from blending practical techniques with post-production finesse. Some of the most emotionally charged moments, such as Connie's memories of her encounters with Paul, use gentle digital cross-dissolves and slowed frame rates to evoke the haze of memory and longing. These editing-based visual effects blur the line between reality and recollection, reinforcing how Connie's perception is clouded by passion and guilt. The slow transitions and ghostly layering of images are not intrusive visual tricks but narrative devices that mirror her fragmented state of mind. When analyzing Unfaithful through the lens of visual effects, one can also appreciate how Line's control over visual rhythm parallels the careful pacing of the story. There is no need for elaborate CGI when lighting, framing, and color already manipulate emotional perception so effectively. Every visual element feels deliberate, and the absence of ostentatious effects becomes a statement in itself, a reminder that real human tension is more compelling than digital spectacle. The choice to keep effects understated also reflects the film's commitment to realism. By avoiding flashy digital manipulation, Line ensures that the audience's attention stays on the characters rather than the visuals. The effects are integrated so subtly that most viewers would never notice them consciously. Yet their presence enhances every scene's believability, turning Unfaithful into a masterclass in invisible craftsmanship. From a modern perspective, the film's minimal reliance on CGI might seem modest, but it highlights a timeless truth: technology should serve story and emotion, not dominate them. In scenes where weather shifts suddenly, or when the mood darkens visually to reflect guilt and despair, the invisible digital hand of post-production becomes evident to those who look closely. But for the average viewer, these touches merge seamlessly with the raw human drama unfolding on screen. In conclusion, Unfaithful 2002 demonstrates how visual effects need not be loud to be effective. Its restrained use of digital enhancements, through weather manipulation, color grading, compositing, and transitional effects, enriches the visual language of the story without ever breaking its realism. The result is a film that feels authentic yet polished, natural yet subtly heightened. Adrian Lyne's attention to detail ensures that every technical choice supports the emotional tone rather than distracting from it. For audiences used to high-budget CGI spectacles, Unfaithful offers a reminder that the most powerful visual effects are often the ones you never notice, those that quietly deepen the mood, underscore the tension, and make the story linger long after the final frame fades to black. Set design and location choices in Unfaithful 2002 play a vital role in grounding the film's emotional realism and visual identity. Directed by Adrian Lyne, the movie thrives on subtle contrasts between the ordered calm of suburban life and the chaotic, impulsive energy of the city. These contrasts are reflected through carefully chosen environments, each space reflecting the psychological state of the characters. The production design by Brian Morris and the location scouting team ensured that every place in the film feels lived in, believable, and symbolically resonant. From Edward and Connie Sumner's spacious home in suburban New York to Paul Martel's moody loft in Manhattan's Soho, the film's world feels tangible and emotionally charged, allowing viewers to step directly into the characters' lives. The suburban home of the Sumners is the heart of the film's visual world. It represents domestic security, moral order, and emotional stagnation. The house is large, comfortable, and tastefully designed in a way that feels authentic to an upper-middle-class American family. Its wide rooms, soft lighting, and neutral color palette give off an atmosphere of calm and safety. However, as the story unfolds, these same features begin to feel suffocating. The perfection of the home turns into a symbol of emotional imprisonment. The production design emphasizes clean lines, natural materials, and an almost sterile neatness that reflects Connie's structured but passionless life. The dining room and kitchen are particularly telling, spaces where family life should thrive, yet they are staged with a sense of distance. Conversations happen across long tables or through quiet glances, and the house's spatial design becomes a visual metaphor for emotional disconnection. In contrast, Paul's apartment in Soho serves as the film's visual and emotional counterpoint. The space is cramped, filled with books, art, and half-finished projects. It radiates sensuality and creative chaos, mirroring Paul's personality and the danger of Connie's affair. The textures are rougher, the lighting dimmer, and the colors darker. Deep browns, blacks, and golds dominate the palette. The loft's exposed brick walls and cluttered surfaces create an atmosphere that feels both intimate and unpredictable. It is a space that invites passion but also amplifies guilt. Adrian Lane and his design team used this setting to externalize Connie's internal conflict. Every time she enters the loft, the mise-en scene visually communicates her transition from order to chaos, from repression to indulgence. The fact that Paul's apartment is located in an urban neighborhood full of noise and movement further reinforces this contrast. While her suburban home feels still and isolated, the city location hums with life, danger, and temptation. Lane's decision to film primarily on location adds authenticity to every scene. The suburban neighborhood sequences were shot in New York's Westchester County, capturing Real streets, homes, and seasonal shifts that reflect the passage of time in the story. The production team used natural light as much as possible in outdoor scenes, giving the film a documentary-like realism. The choice of filming during fall, with its dying leaves and muted colors, visually aligns with the film's themes of decay, betrayal, and the fading warmth of marriage. In contrast, scenes set in the city utilize a colder visual tone, often featuring overcast skies or dimly lit interiors that evoke secrecy and moral ambiguity. Props and set dressing also play a major role in conveying character psychology. In the Sumner household, everything is neatly arranged: framed family photos, decorative objects, and organized bookshelves. Each item contributes to the sense of routine and stability that defines their lives. Even Edward's workspace, his office filled with glass, steel, and papers, reflects his need for order and control. By contrast, Paul's apartment contains scattered art books, unmade beds, and fragments of an unfinished life. The clutter in his space serves as a visual cue of his unpredictability and emotional openness, making it easy to understand why Connie is drawn to him. The film's use of transitional spaces, streets, train stations, and cafes further reinforces its emotional architecture. Connie's journeys between suburb and city are filmed with a keen awareness of geography and tone. The train, a recurring motif, becomes a liminal space representing her movement between two moral worlds. The cinematography captures these travels with subtle shifts in light and framing. Wide shots of open suburban landscapes give way to compressed city frames filled with shadows and glass reflections. This visual shift reflects her psychological descent from innocence into moral complexity. One of the most effective set pieces is Paul's building itself. The old elevator, creaky stairs, and narrow hallways contribute to the film's sensual tension. The physical effort it takes for Connie to reach his loft, climbing steps, walking through dim corridors, mirrors her emotional climb toward danger. Production design turns these seemingly mundane details into visual storytelling tools. Even the use of mirrors and windows throughout the film reinforces the theme of duality and reflection. Connie is often seen framed within reflective surfaces, glass doors, mirrors, or train windows, symbolizing her fractured sense of self and the split between her moral and passionate sides. Adrian Lane is known for his meticulous attention to visual texture, and Unfaithful continues that tradition. The design team's approach to color, light, and architecture is unified by an understanding that spaces are emotional landscapes. When the affair begins, the city appears inviting and full of possibility. As the guilt builds, those same streets and apartments grow darker, their beauty turning oppressive. Similarly, the once bright suburban home becomes shadowed and tense, its silence now filled with suspicion. In the final scenes, as Edward and Connie sit silently in their car outside a police station, the setting, empty streets bathed in cold light, feels like a culmination of the film's visual strategy. The world they inhabit has closed in on them, and every space they once found comfort in now feels haunted. The production design and location choices thus become a silent narrator, speaking volumes about the characters' internal states. In conclusion, The set design and locations in Unfaithful 2002 are far more than backdrops. They are emotional extensions of the story. From the polished emptiness of suburban domesticity to the raw energy of the city, each setting tells its own story about love, desire, guilt, and consequence. The careful balance of realism and symbolism makes every location a living part of the film's atmosphere. Adrian Lyne and his production team crafted a world that mirrors the moral and emotional decay at the heart of the narrative, proving that in great filmmaking, environment is character. The dialogue and script in Unfaithful 2002, written by Alvin Sargent and William Broyles Jr., are central to the film's emotional impact. The screenplay's strength lies in its ability to communicate deep psychological tension through simple, natural, and often understated dialogue. This is not a film built on witty exchanges or overt exposition. Instead, it relies on subtle conversations, pauses, and silences that mirror the complex emotions of its characters. The words are carefully chosen to feel real, unforced, and reflective of how people actually speak when they are afraid, guilty, or uncertain. Adrian Lyne's direction complements this writing style, often allowing gestures or expressions to carry more meaning than a page full of dialogue could. From the very beginning, the script establishes tone through restrained communication. The opening scenes between Connie and Edward are filled with domestic small talk, ordinary lines about chores, work, and their son. On the surface, these exchanges seem mundane, but the lack of emotional energy in their words hints at a deeper problem. The screenplay uses everyday dialogue to express emotional distance. There's no shouting or direct conflict early on, but the silence between sentences, the awkward pauses, and the routine nature of their talk communicate more about their relationship than any explicit statement could. This understated approach makes the eventual breakdown of their marriage more believable because it evolves naturally out of the unsaid. When Connie meets Paul Martel, the dialogue changes tone entirely. Paul's speech is poetic, mysterious, and suggestive, standing in sharp contrast to the simple, domestic rhythm of her earlier conversations. His lines are filled with charm and quiet provocation, designed to draw her in without seeming overtly manipulative. For example, when he first flirts with her about her book purchase, his tone is playful but layered with subtext. He doesn't just compliment her, he creates intimacy by speaking in a way that invites curiosity. The writers use this shift in dialogue style to show how Connie is drawn not only to Paul's physicality but also to the novelty of being spoken to in a way that feels exciting and alive. The contrast between the language of the affair and the language of the marriage becomes one of the screenplay's most powerful tools for expressing emotional transformation. As the affair deepens, dialogue becomes sparser, and silence starts to dominate their interactions. In these scenes, the screenplay relies heavily on subtext. What the characters don't say is more important than what they do. In moments where Connie tries to explain her actions or justify her decisions, she struggles for words, and her hesitations reveal guilt far more effectively than a full confession would. The writers understand that in a story about infidelity, emotional truth is best expressed through omission. A perfect example is the dinner scene after Edward begins to suspect her affair. The words exchanged are simple and polite, but every glance, pause, and forced smile carries unbearable tension. The script gives the actors just enough dialogue to play the scene truthfully without spelling out the conflict. The dialogue between Edward and Connie after he discovers her betrayal represents some of the film's finest writing. Edward's speech is quiet and restrained rather than explosive, and that makes it more realistic and devastating. The writers resist the temptation to make him melodramatic. Instead, they craft his lines to reflect disbelief and heartbreak. His short, broken questions, "Who is he?" and "How long?" are written to sound like someone trying to stay composed while his world collapses. The brevity of his dialogue reflects the rawness of his emotion. Connie's responses are equally fragmented, as if she can barely form words under the weight of guilt. These simple, unadorned exchanges heighten the authenticity of the moment and allow the audience to project their own emotions into the silence between the lines. Another hallmark of the script is its use of repetition and callback. Certain words and phrases reappear at key emotional points, reinforcing the cyclical nature of deceit and regret. For example, phrases that once seemed innocent, like "I'm fine" or "just a friend," return later in darker, more painful contexts. This repetition serves as an emotional echo, reminding the audience how language can lose meaning when used to conceal truth. The film also uses dialogue to explore morality without turning preachy. Conversations between Edward and his colleagues or between Connie and her friends include casual remarks about relationships and loyalty that subtly foreshadow the film's central conflict. These lines might seem throwaway at first, but they carry thematic weight, hinting at the universal fragility of trust and desire. The writers skillfully balance naturalism and symbolism, ensuring that even minor exchanges contribute to the film's moral and emotional landscape. While most of the dialogue feels organic, there are a few moments where the writing edges toward melodrama, particularly in the later scenes following Paul's death. A few of Edward's outbursts feel slightly too self-conscious, as if the script is aware of its own tragedy. However, these moments are rare and largely overshadowed by the film's overall restraint. In fact, the final scenes return to quiet, powerful dialogue. As the couple drives toward the police station, their conversation is minimal, just a few words exchanged about what they should do next. Yet this minimalism carries immense weight. The stillness of their words suggests acceptance, love, and moral exhaustion all at once. The writers close the story not with a speech, but with silence, reinforcing one of the screenplay's central ideas, that in the face of betrayal and guilt, there are no words strong enough to resolve the pain. The dialogue in Unfaithful is also notable for its gender dynamics. Connie's lines often reflect inner conflict and suppressed desire, while Edward's reflect reason, order, and eventual breakdown. The contrast between their ways of speaking mirrors their emotional journeys. Connie moves from guarded to expressive, then back to silence, while Edward moves from rational calm to emotional eruption. This progression gives their relationship an authentic arc grounded in how real couples communicate under strain. In conclusion, the dialogue and script of Unfaithful 2002 demonstrate the power of restraint. Through carefully constructed natural speech, meaningful pauses, and unspoken emotion, the screenplay captures the essence of human fragility. It avoids the cliches of typical infidelity dramas by focusing on emotional truth rather than spectacle. Every line, every silence, and every unfinished sentence adds to the film's layered storytelling. The writing respects the intelligence of its audience, trusting viewers to read between the lines and feel what the characters cannot express aloud. It is a masterclass in using dialogue as both a reflection of character and a vessel for subtext, making Unfaithful not just a story about betrayal, but a study of how love and guilt sound when spoken softly. Unfaithful 2002 firmly belongs to the psychological drama and erotic thriller genres, yet it transcends the conventional boundaries of both. Directed by Diane Lane, who is known for exploring moral tension and sexual temptation in films like Fatal Attraction and Indecent Proposal, Unfaithful takes a familiar premise, marital infidelity, and turns it into a slow-burning exploration of guilt, passion, and consequence. Instead of following the high-stakes sensationalism typical of thrillers, Lane crafts a character-driven story that examines how a single act of betrayal unravels an entire life. In this sense, the film honors the core expectations of its genre while refining them with emotional realism and restraint. As an erotic thriller, Unfaithful meets audience expectations in terms of tone and atmosphere. The genre often relies on physical attraction, secrecy, and moral danger, and this film executes those elements with precision. The tension between Connie, Diane Lane, and Paul, Olivier Martinez, builds through small, intimate gestures rather than overt seduction. Their relationship evolves in glances, hesitant touches, and silences charged with desire. These moments fulfill the erotic element expected from the genre but are treated with a maturity that distinguishes Unfaithful from more exploitative thrillers. Lane's signature style, slow pacing, soft lighting, and sensual framing, ensures that the passion feels authentic rather than gratuitous. The eroticism becomes a psychological window into Connie's character rather than just a spectacle for the audience. What separates Unfaithful from typical genre films is how it treats infidelity not as a thrilling scandal but as a moral and emotional crisis. Many erotic thrillers of the 1990s and early 2000s emphasized the external consequences of an affair, often turning to violence, blackmail, or revenge. Unfaithful, however, focuses inward. The real suspense lies in whether Connie can live with her guilt and whether Edward, Richard Gere, will uncover the truth. This slow, tension-filled unraveling aligns more with psychological drama than traditional thriller structure. The film's pacing deliberately avoids the rapid escalation common in the genre, allowing viewers to feel the weight of each emotional decision. In the first act, the film establishes its dramatic foundation through careful realism. The suburban setting, family dynamics, and small daily routines create a sense of normalcy that audiences can relate to. When Connie meets Paul, the shift from stability to danger feels organic. The screenplay avoids cliché by not portraying Connie as a victim or a villain. Instead, she is a complex woman experiencing a crisis of desire and identity. This nuanced characterization is a departure from genre conventions, which often reduce female characters to moral symbols. By allowing Connie to exist in moral grayness, the film honors the dramatic tradition of character study rather than adhering strictly to the thriller formula. When the story takes its darker turn, Edward's discovery of the affair and the accidental killing of Paul, it reintroduces the thriller element in a subtle but powerful way. The murder scene is not staged as a spectacle of violence but as a shocking moment of emotional collapse. The camera lingers on Edward's face, the disbelief and horror replacing the need for excessive blood or action. This moment represents the film's most significant genre innovation. It transforms the expected climax of a thriller into a moment of psychological devastation. Rather than offering catharsis or revenge, the film turns inward, showing the crushing aftermath of guilt and concealment. Unfaithful's refusal to sensationalize its plot points also sets it apart from mainstream genre films. The aftermath of Paul's death does not spiral into a police chase or public scandal. Instead, it becomes a study in silence and repression. The tension comes from watching Edward and Connie struggle to maintain normalcy while both knowing that nothing can ever return to the way it was. The pacing slows deliberately during this stretch, emphasizing psychological realism over narrative convenience. For some viewers accustomed to faster-paced thrillers, this restraint might feel unconventional, but for others, it deepens the emotional authenticity of the story. Thematically, Unfaithful fulfills the moral undercurrent expected from dramas dealing with infidelity. Every action carries a consequence, and no pleasure comes without pain. Yet, it also challenges audience expectations by refusing to moralize overtly. There is no clear punishment or redemption at the end. Instead, the film ends with ambiguity, leaving the couple's fate unresolved. This open-ended conclusion is rare for its genre, which typically favors definitive resolution. Line trusts the audience to grapple with the moral questions themselves, making the film more reflective and less prescriptive than its peers. In comparing Unfaithful to other films in its genre, it stands closer to Fatal Attraction or Eyes Wide Shut than to typical Hollywood thrillers. Like those films, it uses desire as a means of exploring identity and emotional emptiness rather than as mere provocation. The eroticism serves as a catalyst for deeper introspection. In contrast, many other thrillers from that period leaned heavily on shock value or sensational plot twists. Unfaithful's disciplined approach, grounded in performance and atmosphere, makes it more timeless. Visually and tonally, the film also reinforces its genre blending. The suburban scenes evoke domestic drama, with natural light and warm tones that suggest comfort and routine. In contrast, the scenes in Paul's apartment adopt the darker, moodier lighting of a classic thriller. The shifting visual language allows the film to straddle two genres simultaneously, moving fluidly between realism and suspense. Another hallmark of the genre is moral tension, and Unfaithful delivers it with quiet precision. The audience is made complicit in Connie's decisions. We experience her desire, guilt, and fear through intimate camera work and emotional performances. The script never lets viewers feel completely comfortable with either her choices or Edward's reactions. This moral discomfort is the hallmark of a great psychological drama and one of the reasons the film endures 2 decades later. If there is one risk the film takes in its genre execution, it is its pacing. Viewers expecting high-intensity drama or shocking twists might find the deliberate rhythm too subdued. However, this pacing is a deliberate creative choice that prioritizes emotional depth over spectacle. In doing so, Line elevates the film beyond its label as an erotic thriller into something more introspective and mature. In conclusion, Unfaithful 2002 successfully honors its genre roots while redefining them. It retains the sensual tension and moral complexity of an erotic thriller but delivers them through the lens of psychological realism. By avoiding cliches, focusing on emotional authenticity, and embracing ambiguity, Diane Lane transforms a familiar premise into a haunting study of human weakness and consequence. It is a film that satisfies both genre expectations and intellectual curiosity, proving that true suspense often lies not in what happens, but in what lingers unspoken afterward. Unfaithful 2002 operates on multiple levels. It is a gripping personal drama, a study of human weakness, and an unspoken commentary on the social and cultural forces that shape modern relationships. While the film never explicitly announces its themes, it quietly dissects the moral, emotional, and societal undercurrents of early 21st century suburban America. At its heart, it explores the tension between comfort and desire, security and freedom, and the illusion of the perfect family life. Through these tensions, Diane Lane crafts a story that reflects not only personal choices but also the unspoken pressures of a society obsessed with appearances, stability, and control. The film's setting is a pristine American suburb, an environment that symbolizes success and respectability. Connie and Edward Sumner live in a beautiful home, have a loving son, and embody the ideal middle-class image. Yet beneath this surface lies dissatisfaction, restlessness, and emotional emptiness. This disconnect between outward perfection and inner turmoil reflects a broader cultural critique. Unfaithful suggests that the American dream, as presented in consumerist and suburban ideals, can become emotionally stifling. The immaculate home, spotless kitchen, and neatly planned routines serve as metaphors for conformity and repression. In this sense, Connie's affair is not just a moral transgression but also an act of rebellion against the suffocating predictability of her environment. Culturally, the film captures the growing disillusionment with marriage and gender roles that defined the early 2000s. The feminist movements of previous decades had redefined women's independence, but Unfaithful shows how emotional fulfillment remained elusive even for women with social privilege. Connie is not oppressed in a traditional sense. She has freedom, comfort, and respect, but she feels unseen. Her affair with Paul can be interpreted as a desperate attempt to reconnect with a sense of vitality and individuality that her domestic life has subdued. This mirrors the broader social reality of women balancing traditional expectations with modern desires for autonomy and passion. From Edward's perspective, the film critiques the masculine ideal of control and possession. Edward's identity is rooted in stability and rationality. He represents the provider archetype. When his wife's betrayal shatters that identity, his reaction exposes the fragility of male ego within traditional gender frameworks. His eventual act of violence is not driven by pure rage but by existential collapse. The film subtly questions how societal definitions of masculinity leave little room for emotional vulnerability. This theme resonates deeply with American culture, where strength and composure are often prized over introspection and emotional honesty. Unfaithful also functions as a commentary on class and privilege. The Sumners' insulated lifestyle allows them to hide their emotional and moral crises behind material comfort. Their tragedy unfolds in private, protected by wealth and social status. The consequences of their actions never fully penetrate beyond their domestic world, which underscores how privilege can shield individuals from accountability. In contrast, Paul represents a different world, bohemian, spontaneous, and detached from material concerns. His freedom and passion attract Connie, yet the film hints at the instability and danger that also accompany such detachment. This clash between structured affluence and raw freedom reflects a cultural anxiety about what modern comfort costs the human spirit. Another key layer of social commentary lies in the film's depiction of secrecy and repression. Post-9/11 America was entering a period of heightened moral scrutiny where the lines between public virtue and private vice became increasingly blurred. Unfaithful speaks to this unease, exploring how people curate idealized images of themselves while concealing private guilt and longing. The Sumner's household becomes a microcosm of a society obsessed with maintaining appearances at all costs. The polished suburban facade mirrors the cultural obsession with perfection, where deviation from the norm, especially sexual or emotional, is met with shame and denial. The film also touches on the timeless issue of moral relativism. It refuses to judge its characters in absolute terms, which challenges the moral clarity that mainstream audiences often expect. By blurring the line between victim and perpetrator, Unfaithful invites viewers to confront their own biases about fidelity, marriage, and morality. This ambiguity reflects a shift in early 2000s American cinema toward more complex portrayals of human behavior, influenced by cultural conversations around authenticity, personal freedom, and the meaning of happiness. Some critics have noted that the film risks oversimplifying its social commentary by framing Connie's affair as purely emotional rather than exploring deeper structural causes of dissatisfaction. The focus on individual psychology rather than social context could be seen as reinforcing the notion that personal unhappiness is self-inflicted rather than socially conditioned. However, this criticism overlooks how Line's direction uses subtle visual cues to convey broader meaning. The repeated imagery of wind, confinement, and domestic order symbolizes the invisible boundaries society places on personal freedom, particularly for women. The film's handling of sexuality is another point of social and cultural interest. Unlike many erotic thrillers that exploit female desire for spectacle, Unfaithful treats it as both sacred and destructive, a force capable of liberation and ruin. This duality reflects evolving cultural attitudes toward female sexuality at the time. The film neither condemns Connie for her choices nor absolves her of responsibility, acknowledging the complexity of human desire in a moral landscape that offers no easy answers. Reception-wise, Unfaithful struck a chord with audiences because it felt uncomfortably real. Viewers recognized the social dynamics it portrayed, the polished family's hiding dysfunction, the unspoken resentment between partners, and the quiet yearning for more. Its commentary on marriage and moral compromise resonated across demographics, particularly among viewers questioning the authenticity of modern relationships. However, some found the film's moral ambiguity unsettling, interpreting its restraint as a lack of resolution. In essence, Unfaithful 2002 is more than a story of adultery. It is a mirror reflecting the anxieties of its time. It examines how comfort breeds disconnection, how societal ideals of success conceal emotional voids, and how the pursuit of authenticity often leads to chaos. The film's power lies in its refusal to preach or resolve. Instead, it leaves viewers to wrestle with their own moral and cultural assumptions. By embedding its personal drama within a larger social context, Unfaithful stands as a subtle but potent commentary on the fragility of modern morality and the emotional costs of maintaining the perfect life in an imperfect world. Unfaithful 2002 is a film designed to provoke emotion, introspection, and conversation. Its power lies not in shock value or spectacle but in the raw, intimate moments that make audiences squirm, sigh, and sometimes silently reflect on their own moral boundaries. The film's emotional engagement is built on realism and restraint, pulling viewers into its world with tension that feels deeply personal. Every look, pause, and silence contributes to the viewer's experience, and this psychological intensity is what keeps audiences returning to it decades after its release. The first scene that captures attention and sets the tone for audience engagement is Connie's chance encounter with Paul in the windy streets of Soho. The moment is innocuous yet charged with energy, and viewers feel an immediate spark. This is not a loud or exaggerated scene. Instead, it's the subtle, accidental intimacy, her stumble, his concern, their shared glance, that creates anticipation. Audiences recognize the pull of forbidden attraction and are drawn into the emotional storm it promises. The scene resonates because it taps into something universal: curiosity and temptation. Many viewers find themselves internally debating Connie's choices from that very moment. The rooftop scene between Connie and Paul is another audience magnet. The visual poetry of the wind, sunlight, and fleeting connection turns into a sensory experience that lingers long after. It's sensual without being explicit, inviting the audience to feel rather than just watch. When the affair begins, the blend of desire and guilt is almost unbearable. The now iconic train sequence, where Connie relives her first sexual encounter with Paul while surrounded by strangers, is perhaps the film's most emotionally charged moment. The editing between past and present creates a visceral rhythm that mirrors her inner chaos. Audiences often respond with conflicted emotions, both understanding her exhilaration and judging her betrayal. This duality sparks discussion. Is this passion worth the destruction it causes? That train scene alone has been endlessly analyzed in forums, essays, and fan discussions because it captures the messy truth about desire and conscience. Another major point of engagement comes with Edward's discovery of the affair. The scene in which he finds Paul's book, with the romantic inscription inside, changes the movie's tone entirely. The camera lingers on Richard Gere's face as realization and heartbreak collide. Viewers feel the weight of his silence. It's one of the few moments in modern film where stillness speaks louder than dialogue. Many audiences empathize deeply with him here, even those who initially sided with Connie's loneliness. His emotional restraint evokes quiet devastation, prompting tears and a sense of moral tension. The murder scene in Paul's apartment is a turning point that leaves audiences gasping. It's not stylized or cinematic, it's sudden, brutal, and almost accidental. The shock lies in how ordinary it feels, which makes it unforgettable. The film doesn't glorify the act, it captures the stunned horror that follows. The long sequence where Edward attempts to clean up the crime scene has viewers on edge, hearts pounding not from fear but from anxiety and disbelief. It's one of those rare cinematic moments where audiences are fully aligned with a character's panic, questioning what they would do in his place. After the murder, the tension doesn't fade, it transforms. Viewers watch Connie and Edward navigate their shared guilt, and every quiet domestic scene becomes charged with unspoken awareness. The car ride near the end, where the couple sits in silence at a stoplight, is one of the most hauntingly ambiguous endings in modern film. Audiences debate endlessly whether they drive away or turn themselves in. That single unanswered question fuels ongoing discussion and rewatch theories. The open ending engages audiences long after the credits roll, as everyone forms their own interpretation of justice, morality, and love. Rewatchability is one of the film's underrated strengths. On the first viewing, audiences focus on the emotional story, Connie's guilt, Edward's heartbreak, Paul's charm. On repeat viewings, attention shifts to details. The symbolism of mirrors and reflections, the subtle shifts in lighting that mirror emotional states, and the recurring use of wind as a metaphor for chaos and desire. Small choices by the director and cinematographer become more noticeable each time, offering new layers of meaning. These artistic subtleties make Unfaithful ideal for analytical audiences who enjoy dissecting film technique and narrative subtext. The movie also encourages fan theories and cultural discussions. Some viewers interpret the entire film as a critique of suburban repression, while others see it as a psychological study of guilt. Online forums have debated whether Edward's final decision represents redemption or denial. Fans frequently discuss the ambiguous ending, often pausing the film at the stoplight scene to analyze facial expressions and speculate on what happens next. In a digital age dominated by quick takes and short-form reactions, the film's slow-burn tension and moral ambiguity have given it a second life through discussions, video essays, and social media clips. Certain scenes, especially Connie's emotional breakdown in the bathtub and Edward's confrontation in the car, have been turned into GIFs and shared widely for their emotional realism. The film's sound design and musical score also deepen engagement. The recurring piano motif enhances the emotional pull of key scenes, while moments of silence amplify discomfort and intimacy. Audiences unconsciously respond to these cues, often realizing upon reflection how much the soundscape shaped their emotional experience. These layers of sound, performance, and direction combine to make Unfaithful a film that demands and rewards attention. Ultimately, audience engagement in Unfaithful 2002 is built on empathy, discomfort, and curiosity. Viewers are not passive observers but active participants, constantly judging, forgiving, and questioning the characters' decisions. It's the kind of film that invites debate about morality and marriage at dinner tables and online threads alike. The emotional hooks are subtle yet lasting, ensuring that every gasp, tear, and whispered conversation about right and wrong continues long after the screen fades to black. When Unfaithful 2002 is placed alongside other films in the same genre or the earlier work of its director, Diane Lane, it becomes part of a long cinematic lineage exploring adultery, desire, and moral collapse. Lane is no stranger to this territory. His previous films, such as Fatal Attraction, 1987, 9.5 Weeks, 1986, and Indecent Proposal, 1993, also revolve around sexual temptation and its consequences. Unfaithful continues that exploration but in a more subdued, introspective way. Where Fatal Attraction played like a high-stakes psychological thriller with a violent and suspenseful climax, Unfaithful unfolds with quiet dread and emotional realism. It exchanges shock for subtlety, offering a slower burn that's less about danger and more about guilt, obsession, and emotional decay. Comparing Unfaithful to Fatal Attraction reveals both continuity and evolution in Lane's style. Fatal Attraction portrays infidelity as a cautionary tale for men, a nightmare that spins out of control when a brief affair leads to psychological torment and danger. Unfaithful flips that narrative by centering the female perspective. Connie's affair is not about vengeance or madness but about loneliness and desire. This shift makes Unfaithful more emotionally complex and, arguably, more human. Instead of demonizing the adulterer, it invites empathy, even when her choices lead to ruin. Lane's direction matures here, relying less on melodrama and more on nuance. The tension builds internally rather than through external threats. Where Fatal Attraction felt like a thriller disguised as a moral warning, Unfaithful feels like a tragedy disguised as a romance. When compared to European films that inspired it, particularly Claude Chabrol's 1969 French film La Femme Infidèle, on which it is based, Unfaithful modernizes the story without losing its moral ambiguity. Chabrol's version is cold, restrained, and analytical, typical of French New Wave sensibilities, focusing on bourgeois hypocrisy. Lane's American adaptation adds sensuality, visual polish, and a deeper focus on emotional consequence. Chabrol ends with a detached moral balance. Lane ends with open emotion and uncertainty. The change reflects cultural sensibilities. Where the French original critiques social structures, the American remake probes personal guilt and love. The two films mirror their respective societies' relationship with infidelity, one intellectual, the other visceral. Comparing Unfaithful to similar Hollywood dramas like Eyes Wide Shut, 1999, or Closer, 2004, reveals another layer. Like Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, Unfaithful explores the gap between fantasy and reality in marriage. Both films use eroticism to expose emotional emptiness and moral fragility. However, while Kubrick's film leans into surrealism and dream logic, Lane's story stays grounded in suburban realism. This grounding makes the discomfort more relatable. Viewers can imagine themselves in Connie or Edward's shoes. Closer, directed by Mike Nichols, also examines infidelity, but through sharp dialogue and emotional cruelty. Unfaithful takes a quieter route, using glances, silence, and body language instead of confrontation. In comparison, Unfaithful is more atmospheric and less verbal, focusing on how betrayal feels rather than how it sounds. Another relevant comparison is with The Bridges of Madison County, 1995. Both films center on women trapped in seemingly stable marriages who experience life-changing passion outside of it. The key difference is tone. Bridges romanticizes the affair as pure and transformative, while Unfaithful presents it as corrosive and self-destructive. Lane refuses to idealize infidelity. His lens stays unflinching, forcing viewers to sit with discomfort rather than nostalgia. This realism is what gives Unfaithful its staying power. It neither condemns nor glorifies desire, leaving space for interpretation. In terms of tone and visual approach, Unfaithful also recalls Todd Haynes's Far From Heaven, 2002, another early 2000s drama that uses visual design and restraint to explore repression and longing. Yet, while Haynes pays homage to 1950s melodrama through stylized art direction, Lane's palette is grounded in earthy tones and intimate camera work. Both films are emotionally devastating, but Unfaithful's contemporary realism makes it more immediate and raw. Within the broader genre of erotic thrillers, Unfaithful stands apart for its lack of sensationalism. Many films in this genre, like Basic Instinct, 1992, or Body Heat, 1981, use seduction and crime as spectacle. Lane instead strips away the glamour. His characters are not archetypes but flawed, ordinary people. There's no mastermind seductress or elaborate murder plot, just a chain of human mistakes that escalate naturally. This restraint makes Unfaithful more psychologically mature, aligning it more closely with dramas like Revolutionary Road, 2008, which similarly dissects suburban disillusionment. Another useful comparison is with Adrian Lyne's own stylistic fingerprints. His fascination with morality, sensuality, and guilt runs through his work, but Unfaithful is arguably his most balanced and least judgmental film. The lighting, the muted pacing, and the emotional silences feel like an artist refining his craft. Where 9.5 Weeks leaned into erotic fantasy, Unfaithful deals with emotional reality. In that sense, it may not be as sensational, but it is more profound. Some critics have also compared Unfaithful to Sam Mendes's American Beauty, 1999, for its portrayal of suburban discontent. Both films explore the emptiness behind perfect family images. However, while American Beauty critiques consumerism and repression through satire, Unfaithful focuses on private emotional implosion. Lane's film avoids the cynicism of Mendes's vision, instead offering compassion for its characters' weaknesses. It's not about mocking hypocrisy but about understanding the pain behind it. Ultimately, Unfaithful 2002 earns its place in cinematic conversation by bridging two traditions, the moral thrillers of mid-century European cinema and the emotionally charged erotic dramas of late 20th century Hollywood. It borrows the narrative skeleton of Chabrol's French realism but infuses it with Lane's sensual American aesthetic. It's quieter than its predecessors but deeper in emotional truth. Where some erotic thrillers chase scandal, Unfaithful chases humanity. When judged next to its peers, it may not be the flashiest or most shocking, but it stands out for daring to be honest about what happens when desire, guilt, and love collide. It's a film that continues to resonate because it feels neither exaggerated nor dated. It feels painfully, beautifully real. Unfaithful 2002 is a film rich with visual and narrative symbolism, using recurring images, colors, and objects to communicate emotional and psychological truths that the characters themselves often fail to articulate. Director Adrian Lane, known for his ability to express passion, guilt, and desire through visual language, constructs a world where every texture, reflection, and small detail carries metaphorical weight. The film's symbols help the audience understand not only what the characters do but also why they do it, and how their choices trap them in cycles of longing, deceit, and regret. One of the most significant symbols throughout the film is the wind, introduced in the very first scene when Connie meets Paul in Soho. The day is marked by a powerful gust that literally knocks her off balance and sends her tumbling into his arms. The wind becomes a metaphor for temptation, chaos, and uncontrollable desire, forces of nature that can't be reasoned with. Connie doesn't plan the encounter, just as she doesn't consciously choose to fall into the affair. The wind symbolizes fate's intervention, sweeping her into a world where emotion overrides logic. It recurs later in scenes of heightened tension or emotional turmoil, suggesting that once the storm of passion is unleashed, there's no containing it. Similarly, the train that carries Connie home after her first encounter with Paul functions as a symbol of emotional disorientation and the duality of pleasure and guilt. In the famous train sequence, the camera cuts between flashes of the sexual encounter and Connie's present state, trembling and flushed among oblivious commuters. The train's rhythmic motion mirrors her inner turbulence. It becomes both the vehicle of her secret life and a metaphor for the unstoppable momentum of her choices. Each time she boards it, the tension between duty and desire intensifies, showing how her affair becomes both a thrill and a burden she can't escape. Another recurring visual motif is glass and reflections, which serve as a mirror of conscience and duplicity. Throughout the film, mirrors, windows, and even glass picture frames subtly appear in moments of dishonesty or self-confrontation. When Connie lies to Edward or to herself, the camera often frames her through reflective surfaces, suggesting fractured identity. She is both the devoted wife and the adulterous lover, two versions of herself that cannot coexist without breaking. Similarly, Edward's eventual discovery of the affair is triggered by visual evidence, photographs. These frozen images serve as symbolic mirrors, showing him a truth that had existed in plain sight but that he refused to acknowledge. Glass and reflections, therefore, symbolize self-deception and the painful process of seeing one's reality clearly for the first time. One of the most powerful symbolic objects in the film is the snow globe, which holds deep emotional and narrative meaning. Initially introduced as a sentimental gift from Edward to Connie, it represents their shared history and the fragile perfection of their marriage. When Edward later finds it in Paul's apartment, the site of betrayal, it becomes an emblem of shattered trust. The snow globe's serene, enclosed world parallels the illusion of their stable suburban life, beautiful, self-contained, but ultimately breakable. When Edward kills Paul with the same object, the act is not just an outburst of violence but a symbolic destruction of the fantasy he once cherished. The snow globe, once a token of love, becomes the weapon of its undoing. Another subtle yet consistent metaphor is color, particularly the contrast between warm and cool tones. The Sumner home is dominated by soft, warm lighting, yellows, browns, and creams, signifying safety and routine. Paul's loft, on the other hand, is bathed in cool blues and grays, evoking both seduction and danger. Whenever Connie visits him, she enters a world of shadows and dim light, a physical manifestation of moral ambiguity. As the affair progresses, these tones begin to blend. Her warm domestic space becomes colder, more distant, while flashes of red, on her clothing or in lighting, begin to appear more frequently, representing both passion and guilt. By the film's climax, the entire visual palette shifts toward desaturation, reflecting the emotional exhaustion of the characters and the collapse of their constructed identities. Books and art also carry metaphorical significance in Unfaithful. Paul's apartment is filled with books, sculptures, and paintings, objects that reflect his worldliness and intellectual allure. To Connie, this environment feels exotic and liberating, a contrast to her suburban domesticity. Yet these objects are also deceptive. They suggest depth but ultimately conceal superficial charm. The book he gives her, inscribed with intimate words, becomes evidence of her betrayal, a symbol of how art, romance, and deceit intertwine. When Edward finds the book, it transforms from a token of love into a document of guilt. The recurring use of rain and water imagery further deepens the film's symbolic texture. Water often appears during moments of cleansing, emotional exposure, or moral crisis. After her encounters with Paul, Connie takes long baths, attempting to wash away her guilt. The bathtub becomes her private confessional, a space where she confronts herself in silence. However, water also symbolizes renewal and destruction. No matter how often she tries to cleanse herself, the stain of betrayal lingers. It is a visual representation of her internal struggle, a futile effort to purify a conscience already tainted. Family photographs and domestic details, like birthday parties, school events, and shared meals, serve as symbols of the idealized life Connie and Edward built together. These seemingly mundane details highlight what's at stake. Every family photo on the wall becomes a silent witness to their disintegration. The home itself, meticulously designed and maintained, acts as a metaphor for repression, a structure built to keep chaos out but incapable of protecting its inhabitants from emotional collapse. By the film's end, when Connie and Edward sit in their car, uncertain about whether to turn themselves in, the landscape outside fades into the background. What remains are the symbols the film has carefully built: the broken snow globe, the reflected images, the haunting silence. These visual metaphors converge into a portrait of human fragility. Adrian Lyne doesn't explain them directly. He trusts the audience to feel their weight. Each recurring image, wind, glass, train, water, deepens the emotional reality of the story, making Unfaithful not just a tale of infidelity but a meditation on the invisible forces that govern passion, guilt, and the price of seeing oneself too clearly. When viewed through the lens of historical and cinematic context, Unfaithful, 2002, becomes more than a domestic thriller about infidelity and consequence. It serves as a reflection of its era and an evolution within its genre. Directed by Adrian Lyne, who was already known for exploring the complexities of erotic tension and moral ambiguity in films like Fatal Attraction, 1987, and 9½ Weeks, 1986, Unfaithful fits seamlessly into a lineage of morally charged dramas that challenged early 2000s sensibilities about marriage, desire, and guilt. Its release came at a time when Hollywood was redefining adult-oriented storytelling, stepping away from the high-concept erotic thrillers of the 80s and 90s toward more psychological, character-driven narratives. The movie's depiction of adultery, rather than being sensationalized, was treated with an emotional realism that mirrored societal shifts in how relationships were portrayed on screen. The early 2000s marked a period where American audiences were increasingly drawn to stories rooted in flawed realism, films that mirrored the imperfections of modern life rather than idealized fantasies. Within that cultural moment, Unfaithful stood out for its quiet intensity and grounded depiction of temptation and consequence. The historical context also ties to the post-9/11 emotional landscape in which it premiered. American cinema was undergoing a shift. Stories became more introspective, less glamorous, and more concerned with the human psyche. While Unfaithful is not political, it does reflect a national mood of uncertainty, the sense that beneath the surface of stability lies chaos and unpredictability. The Connors' seemingly perfect suburban life mirrors that societal illusion, one of comfort masking deeper emotional unrest. In this way, the film captures the tension between appearances and reality, a motif deeply resonant in that cultural era. When compared to Lyne's earlier works, Unfaithful represents a more mature, restrained approach to similar themes. Where Fatal Attraction reveled in shock value and suspense, Unfaithful opts for subtlety. It explores the same moral boundaries, loyalty, passion, and punishment, but through quieter moments and deeper introspection. Lyne's evolution as a filmmaker can be felt in how he allows silence, glances, and atmosphere to carry as much weight as any act of violence or betrayal. The film also acknowledges the cinematic legacy of European dramas, particularly those by directors like Claude Chabrol or François Truffaut, who examined bourgeois morality with detached realism. The story itself is inspired by the 1969 French film The Unfaithful Wife, La Femme Infidèle, and Lyne's version both honors and reimagines that narrative. He keeps the premise intact, a wife's affair leading to tragedy, but infuses it with American emotional sensibilities and the pacing of contemporary thrillers. By doing so, he bridges two cinematic traditions: the restrained, observational storytelling of French cinema and the visceral, emotionally charged style of American filmmaking. Historically, Unfaithful also contributed to the decline of the erotic thriller as a mainstream genre. After its release, Hollywood largely turned away from adult dramas toward franchise-driven blockbusters. Unfaithful became one of the last notable entries in a genre that once dominated theaters. It demonstrated that a film could be sensual without being exploitative and suspenseful without relying on action or gore. This tonal shift influenced later films that explored intimacy and deception with psychological nuance rather than explicit sensationalism. From a cultural perspective, Unfaithful speaks to early 21st century gender dynamics and shifting attitudes toward fidelity. The film's sympathetic portrayal of Connie's internal conflict marked a subtle but important shift in how female desire was represented on screen. Unlike many of its predecessors that punished women for transgression without complexity, Unfaithful gives equal emotional weight to her longing, guilt, and despair. It mirrors the era's growing awareness of women's interior lives and the contradictions of modern marriage. The film's realism, from its subdued suburban setting to its quiet moral unraveling, captured an audience that was beginning to crave authenticity over spectacle. In broader cinematic context, Unfaithful also aligns with other films of its time that examined moral decay within ordinary lives, such as American Beauty, 1999, and The Hours, 2002. All three explore the tension between external perfection and internal dissatisfaction, revealing the emotional cost of repression and conformity. Thematically, they share a fascination with the fragility of human connection in a culture obsessed with image and control. Unfaithful's lasting legacy is its ability to occupy a middle ground between art and entertainment, between sensuality and restraint. Its historical importance lies not only in its craftsmanship but also in its timing, a film that arrived at the end of one cinematic era and quietly foreshadowed another. In a Hollywood landscape increasingly dominated by franchises, Unfaithful remains one of the last major studio dramas that treated adult emotions with sincerity and gravitas. Looking back, its story of love, betrayal, and consequence feels timeless, but its cultural resonance is distinctly early 2000s, a moment when audiences were still willing to confront uncomfortable truths about desire, morality, and the messy human heart. When discussing the budget and box office performance of Unfaithful, 2002, it becomes clear that this film achieved a strong balance between financial prudence and cinematic richness. Directed by Diane Lane and starring Richard Gere, Diane Lane, and Olivier Martinez, Unfaithful was not a blockbuster in scale or ambition, but it used its modest budget effectively to deliver a visually polished and emotionally resonant film that exceeded expectations both critically and commercially. The production budget for Unfaithful was reported to be around $50 million, a moderate figure for a studio-backed adult drama in the early 2000s. For perspective, this was a period when major studios were increasingly steering funds toward franchise films, action spectacles, and comedies that promised broader appeal. Erotic thrillers and domestic dramas had become less common in mainstream cinema, especially after the late 1990s. Yet, Lane's established reputation and the star power of Gere and Lane justified the investment. The film's production values clearly reflect that budget. Lane's meticulous attention to lighting, set design, and atmosphere ensures every frame looks far more expensive than its actual cost. The film's aesthetic, defined by natural lighting, soft tones, and emotionally intimate camera work, does not rely on costly spectacle but rather on the precision of visual storytelling. The cinematography by Peter Bijou and the art direction by Christy Z transform everyday suburban life into a moody, sensual world filled with tension and unspoken emotion. From the Connors' pristine Westchester home to Paul Martel's cluttered Soho loft, the production design feels rich, layered, and realistic without being extravagant. Much of the budget appears to have gone toward creating this authenticity and supporting the performances rather than visual effects or action sequences. Casting was another significant expense that paid off handsomely. Diane Lane and Richard Gere, both well-known and respected actors, brought emotional credibility that elevated the film beyond its erotic thriller premise. Lane's performance, in particular, garnered critical acclaim and an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. Her casting gave the film prestige, which in turn contributed to its strong box office run. Gere's name recognition, especially among mature audiences, also helped attract a demographic often overlooked by mainstream Hollywood offerings at the time. Marketing played a key role in positioning Unfaithful as more than just another erotic drama. The promotional campaign emphasized emotional complexity and moral tension rather than simply selling the film as a tale of passion and betrayal. Trailers and posters focused on the psychological consequences of infidelity and the unraveling of a family rather than explicit content. This strategy helped broaden the audience to include not only fans of thrillers but also viewers interested in adult-oriented dramas. Released in May 2002 by 20th Century Fox, the timing was strategic. The film arrived before the summer blockbuster season began, giving it breathing room to capture attention without competing with effects-heavy franchises. Its opening weekend grossed approximately $14 million in North America, a solid start that reflected the effectiveness of its targeted marketing. Word of mouth and critical discussion helped sustain its momentum. Ultimately, Unfaithful earned over $52 million domestically and around $119 million worldwide, more than doubling its production budget. This level of profitability was impressive for a film with no franchise ties, limited international marketing, and a genre that was increasingly niche. The box office success demonstrated that audiences were still hungry for character-driven adult dramas when executed with skill and emotional depth. Compared to contemporaneous studio projects, Unfaithful punched well above its financial weight. Films with similar budgets often struggled to achieve both critical respect and commercial viability, but Line's film managed both. It was especially successful in markets where Line's earlier films had built a following, such as Europe, where audiences tend to appreciate slower, psychologically rich storytelling. The film's performance also reflected a transitional moment in Hollywood economics. Around 2002, studios were beginning to cut back on mid-budget dramas in favor of tentpole productions. Unfaithful's success temporarily reaffirmed that such mid-range films could still find profitability through strong direction, recognizable stars, and sophisticated marketing. Its box office appeal rested on emotional resonance rather than spectacle, suggesting that intimacy and moral complexity could still drive ticket sales. Financially, Unfaithful's long-term performance benefited from strong home video and DVD sales, which were at their peak in the early 2000s. The film's rewatchability, tied to its suspenseful tone and layered performances, made it a consistent rental and purchase title for years. It also found a second life on cable networks, where it frequently aired on premium channels, further expanding its audience and extending its profitability beyond the theatrical window. Looking at Unfaithful's cost-to-value ratio, it stands as a model of efficiency in storytelling economics. The film delivered visual sophistication, top-tier performances, and cultural resonance without requiring an inflated budget. Its financial success underscored the power of emotional tension and moral ambiguity to attract viewers when paired with strong craftsmanship. Even today, Unfaithful is often cited as one of the last financially successful erotic thrillers of its kind, a film that achieved profitability not through excess but through precision. In retrospect, Unfaithful represents a high point for the genre and a reminder that well-crafted adult dramas can compete commercially when they connect with universal human experiences. Its careful allocation of budget resources, coupled with intelligent marketing and timeless themes, ensured it not only covered its costs but also left a lasting mark in early 21st century cinema as both a financial and artistic success. Unfaithful, 2002, directed by Diane Lane, is a film that continues to resonate with audiences 2 decades after its release, largely due to its emotionally charged performances, sensual cinematography, and haunting moral questions. While it was originally crafted for the theatrical experience, the ways in which viewers can experience the film today have evolved. The modern viewer has multiple options, including streaming, digital rental, or physical media, and each comes with its own unique atmosphere and benefits. Understanding how best to watch Unfaithful depends on what kind of emotional and cinematic experience you seek. When Unfaithful first hit theaters in May 2002, it was designed to be experienced on the big screen. Diane Lane, known for his deliberate pacing and sensual visual storytelling, used wide compositions, moody lighting, and quiet tension to make viewers feel like voyeurs to a private unraveling. In a theater, that atmosphere was immersive. The controlled darkness, large-scale projection, and surround sound amplified the tension between characters and highlighted the intimacy of every whispered exchange and subtle gesture. Watching the film in a theater allowed the visual details, the soft, natural lighting, the reflections in mirrors, the fine textures of fabric and skin, to envelop the audience. While it is rare to find Unfaithful in theatrical re-releases today, the film occasionally returns in limited screenings or retrospectives focused on early 2000s cinema or the works of Diane Lane. For viewers who appreciate the cinematic craft, catching a big-screen revival is worth the effort, as it restores the film's slow-burn intensity and lets you experience its emotional weight in full visual scale. For most audiences, however, streaming or home viewing is the most accessible option. Unfaithful has been a consistent presence across major streaming platforms over the years. It often appears on subscription-based services that specialize in drama and thrillers, and it is also widely available for digital rental or purchase through popular platforms. These digital options allow viewers to experience the film in high definition, which is essential to appreciate Line's detailed visual compositions. The film's crisp imagery and subdued color palette benefit from HD streaming, capturing the emotional realism and tactile quality that define its visual storytelling. Home viewing offers a more intimate experience, aligning perfectly with the tone of the film. Unfaithful is not a film that requires theatrical spectacle. It thrives in quietness, subtle facial expressions, and emotional nuance. Watching it in a darkened room, perhaps late at night, creates the right psychological setting for the story's tension. Using a good sound system or headphones enhances the experience, as the film's use of silence, ambient sound, and minimalist score are crucial to its impact. Every breath, footstep, and rustle contributes to the building sense of unease, and that precision is best appreciated in a focused environment. The film's pacing rewards attentive viewing rather than casual background watching. While some films are easy to play while multitasking, Unfaithful demands emotional engagement and concentration. The small pauses between dialogue, the glances that reveal guilt or desire, and the changes in tone all require presence. Viewers watching at home should treat it like a theater experience. Dim the lights, put away distractions, and allow the slow burn of tension to unfold naturally. It's not an overly long film, but its deliberate rhythm rewards patience. For those who collect physical media, Unfaithful has been released on DVD and Blu-ray, both of which include strong visual transfers and sometimes bonus features such as commentary or behind-the-scenes material. The Blu-ray edition, in particular, captures the warm and shadowed cinematography with greater depth than standard streaming compression allows. Watching the film on Blu-ray can be a treat for enthusiasts who value visual fidelity and want to experience it as close to its theatrical texture as possible. Some versions also include alternate scenes and production insights that give added context to Line's choices, making it ideal for film students or cinephiles. On streaming, accessibility and convenience come at the cost of occasional visual compromise depending on internet speed and platform compression. That said, modern streaming resolutions still do the film justice, and the convenience of on-demand viewing allows new generations to discover it. Whether on a large television with surround sound or on a high-quality tablet with headphones, the film's emotional resonance remains intact if watched attentively. For first-time viewers, it is recommended to approach Unfaithful in a calm, uninterrupted environment. The movie's emotional core depends on building empathy and moral discomfort, and those sensations are best felt when the viewer is absorbed. Watching with a partner can spark meaningful discussions afterward, as the film's themes of trust, betrayal, and moral consequence invite reflection and debate. It's also a film that benefits from rewatching. Knowing the trajectory of the characters allows viewers to notice subtle foreshadowing and symbolic visual cues on a second viewing. For those exploring Unfaithful for its technical craft, it's worth noting that Adrian Lyne's direction is rich with controlled visual storytelling. Watching on a screen large enough to appreciate framing, lighting contrasts, and background details will heighten the appreciation of his craftsmanship. The intimacy of close-ups, the texture of rain on glass, and the subtle play of shadows in confined spaces all come through more vividly when watched on a properly calibrated display rather than a phone screen. Ultimately, Unfaithful can be appreciated in multiple formats, but it shines most in settings that encourage immersion and reflection. While the theater experience remains the ideal for cinematic purists, the film's power lies in its quiet intensity, which translates beautifully to home viewing when given the right attention. Whether streamed in high definition, rented digitally, or watched on Blu-ray, the film's impact depends less on format and more on focus. For U.S. audiences today, the best way to experience Unfaithful is at home, lights low, sound crisp, and mind open to the moral and emotional complexity that unfolds. In this setting, the story's tension and artistry resonate as strongly as they did on the big screen over 20 years ago. If you liked this video, Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more amazing content. Your support really helps us create more detailed and high-quality videos just like this one, so make sure to hit the bell icon and stay updated with our latest uploads.